Welcome to the second day of Earth Day Week broadcast, brought to you by We Don't Have Time, Earth Day and Exponential Roadmap. Today's theme is circular economy and consumption. We finish off on Saturday with a hackathon, and it's fully registered, but please do sign up anyway, and you look into how you do this on wedon'thavetime.org, so we can put you on the waiting list. My name is Katarina Rolfsdotter Jansson, and I am your host.
Today, young people from all over Philadelphia came out to start putting some beauty back into...
Coming into Philadelphia about an hour and a half ago, it doesn't make sense.
I don't want anything to get in our way.
Participamos da Revolução de 1900.
The effects of the flood are still devastating.
Starvation to get a lot worse. The epic fire season.
Climate change is happening now. The Earth is burning.
New vision that changed the conversation.
Most likely battery-operated vehicles.
This Climate Student International, what is it? Keep an eye on these wonderful people doing their utmost for the future of the next generation.
Mike won't want to hear this, but I'm done with fossil fuels.
Climate change, fighting climate change.
Take climate change into account.
And financial giants moving trillions to attain net zero carbon.
Am I right?
I think it would have an impact to halve emissions by 2030.
A few minutes ago.
In Davos, you've seen it, you heard it, you've read it.
It requires good education.
Climate change, fighting climate change. Business is not doing enough. And what's the way forward?
With me here in the studio, I have Ingmar Renshag, CEO and founder of We Don't Have Time, Nick Nuttall from Earth Day, and Johan Falk from Exponential Roadmap. Johan Falk, why are you co-hosting this event?
Thank you, Katarina. To address the climate crisis, we need to focus on the solutions, not just the problems. And as we state in the Exponential Roadmap, we need to halve emissions every decade. But in order to do that, we need to scale the new green solutions. We need to scale them exponentially, very fast. And circular is extremely important, so I'm very excited to be here and talk about that today.
Thank you very much, Johan Falk. Ingmar Renshag, how about starting this broadcast off by giving some love?
Excellent idea. And I would like to give a big love to all Earth Day Week's partners. We had incredible 452,000 viewers on our show yesterday. And especially, I would like to give a climate love through our app to Twitter, because over 425,000 viewers were from the Twitter platform, and we're really proud to also have you as a partner. And I think this is great stuff that Twitter is supporting the climate movement. So now I'm going to give Twitter a climate love. And it's super easy to give love to someone or an organization that is doing something good in our app. You just search for them. And
it's a typo.
It's a typo. This is live. It was just to show that. Here we go, and we gave them climate love because they are supporting the climate movement.
That's easy.
Yep. And what everyone can do now is to open our app and agree to this ID. So that was my love.
Wonderful. How about you, Nick? Who do you want to give some love to?
Yeah, I've already given some love, actually, just before I started the show. I've given my love to this amazing campaign, which is called Digital Cleanup Day. So everybody that's unfortunately stuck at home right now because of the COVID lockdown needs to basically clean up their phones, their laptops, their email systems, because people don't realize that the emissions from all these images and apps that you don't need and emails is actually meaning that the internet is now producing over 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is like aviation. So why don't you clean up your dirty phone and get rid of all those superfluous things that you have on it, including all those photos from last year's holiday that nobody wants to see anymore.
That's a great campaign, Nick. And also, today's theme, what would you like to say about it? Why is it important?
I think it's absolutely critical. I mean, people have been talking about something called the circular economy for decades, and I think it's the World Business Council on Sustainable Development that has said that only about 3% of the global economy is actually digital. Sorry, not digital, is circular. But we were just saying before, Johan and I, that in nature, nature doesn't waste anything. Any species that produce waste and didn't know how to reuse waste would have been long ago extinct. So we need to mimic nature in a sense and get smarter, where we just agreed that maybe in a few years' time, in the Oxford English Dictionary, the word waste would no longer appear.
Let's look forward to that. Okay. Thank you very much, Johan Falk, Nick Nuttall, and Ingmar Rentzhog. Thanks. Now we're moving on to the first speaker of this exciting second day.
This is Jeffrey D. Sachs, twice named as one of Time magazine's most influential world leaders and ranked by The Economist among the top 3 most influential living economists. Jeffrey is a university professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, director of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and a commissioner of the UN Broadband Commission for Development. He has been advisor to 3 UN Secretaries General and currently serves as a Sustainable Development Goal Advocate under Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Welcome to the program, Jeffrey Sachs. We are very honored to have you on board. You have our full attention.
Thank you very much. Well, the honor is all for me. What a wonderful service you provide. We don't have time is indeed probably the essential state of affairs of humanity today, not only because of climate change, which is the focus of this wonderful series, but of course, because of COVID-19, we are behind in controlling a devastating epidemic. I'm in New York City, an epicenter of this epidemic, and time is the essential issue of an epidemic. I thought in my brief remarks I would offer 5 points of comparison of the global pandemic and the climate change crisis. They are in a way similar, although the time dimension's a little bit different. The structure, the responses, the policy challenges, the need for leadership is actually very similar. The first point of comparison that I would make between climate change and COVID-19, the pandemic, is that we have had ample warnings of both. For years and years, public health specialists warned us of the risks of a global pandemic. Indeed, we saw with our own eyes, we had the fear of emerging diseases, whether it was SARS in 2003 or MERS or Ebola. We knew, and one looks back at all of the warnings and the panels and so on that said there will be a global pandemic because of the nature of newly emerging infectious diseases. We did not heed those warnings in any adequate way. Well, obviously on climate change, we've been having the warnings for decades. We are 29 years or 28 years after the signing of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and we still have not heeded those warnings adequately. The second fundamental feature that makes the epidemic and the climate change crisis so similar is the underlying logic and difficulty of apprehension of exponential growth. Climate change is an exponential process in that the world economy grows at a geometric rate, about 3% per year in normal non-pandemic years. That means a doubling time of every generation, roughly every 20 years, the world economy doubles. As is constantly rightly noted, the Earth doesn't double at all, but the economic activity does. And that means the fossil fuel use, the human pressures on the planet, the anthropogenic forcings, and in particular, the rise of greenhouse gases. Similarly, with COVID-19, there's a doubling time of every few days in an uncontrolled epidemic. It is a geometric process. It's why, even though a country may seem to have almost no cases, within a few days or a few weeks, the country is completely overwhelmed by the devastation of the pandemic. The third point that I would emphasize is similar is the complacency and the arrogance of the rich countries. In this pandemic, the rich countries are being very hard hit. They did not escape this. This is not a disease of the poor countries. The rich countries actually more or less stood by in January and February, with the exception of East Asian countries, as the cases were coming to Europe and to the United States, and because of geometric growth, were multiplying. I live in the country with the most arrogant politics, the United States, and the most narcissistic and arrogant leader, Donald Trump. And so he completely dismissed the threats, the risks, did nothing for weeks and weeks until the United States was overtaken by the pandemic. It's not surprising that he has done nothing on climate change also. I'll come back to that. So this is a case where being rich doesn't make you smart. It may make you arrogant and lazy. And in the pandemic, the rich Western countries have been very hard hit, and the rich Western countries in climate change have not heeded the warnings adequately. The fourth point I would make about the similarities of the pandemic and climate change is that they both have solutions. And indeed, there are cases in the world, important countries, and important examples of at least relative success in controlling the spread of the pandemic. What works in the case of the pandemic is public health, quickly identifying people who are infected, testing them, helping them to self-isolation, tracing their contacts, testing those contacts, helping those people who are infected stay in isolation so that they don't infect others, and thereby breaking the chain reaction. Most of the rich countries failed in that basic public health strategy, and instead the epidemic spread until it had to be confronted by a massive lockdown at great cost to the economy and to society. That was necessary given the failures of public health, but it is public health targeted activity that can control the epidemic. And that is what countries in East Asia, Korea being a notable example, Hong Kong, China itself after the initial outbreak in Wuhan, all showing how to use public health, isolation, testing, contact tracing to keep the epidemic under control. Well, the same is true with climate change. We have solutions, and the solutions focus on decarbonization of the energy system and ending deforestation and land degradation, which also releases massive amounts of greenhouse gases. We have a path to success, both in controlling the epidemic and in fighting climate change. They're practical, but they have to be undertaken. And this brings me to the fifth point of similarity. Confronting the epidemic and confronting climate change require leadership. Markets cannot solve these problems by themselves. Decentralized activity cannot solve an epidemic and cannot solve climate change. We need leadership that mobilizes the collective resources of a society and organizes those responses adequately and does so based on science and based on evidence. Well, here is part of the explanation, again, of the massive failure of many countries and many rich, sophisticated countries to confront both the pandemic and climate change. And my country, the United States, is unfortunately Exhibit A. President Trump exemplifies the problem. He is a narcissist. He is a psychopath. He is unable to process scientific information, and he's uninterested in the truth. When it came to the pandemic, he dismissed the expert advice for weeks and weeks and weeks until the United States was overwhelmed by the epidemic. When it comes to climate change, of course, he is the world's leading denialist, not because he believes or doesn't believe in climate change. He doesn't care. He believes in oil companies. He believes in making money now, the future be damned. And so it is the short-sightedness, the narcissism, the inability to have politics for the common good that characterizes the failure of the United States. The political system is broken and the leadership is broken. And this is true in other important countries. I think of Brazil, where the Amazon has been on fire this year, where Bolsonaro is both a climate change denialist and a COVID-19 denialist. It goes together. It is a kind of narcissism, running the state for one's own ego rather than politics for the common good. Of course, there are political leaders of profound distinction as well. Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand is an exemplar of a leader who has put the common good in front. New Zealand has kept the pandemic under control because of early action, and she is a leader on the climate change agenda. And so I want to emphasize we face the common underlying threats of epidemics, war, one could add, climate change, where we understand and we know the threats. We need to base our actions on evidence, on science, on early response, on understanding the snowball or geometric growth effects, and on making our politics work for the common good. Thank you for letting me join you with brief remarks at this very troubling time. But we can't wait. We don't have time either to fight the pandemic now, to save lives, or to save our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey Sachs, for sharing your insights. As an ex-New Yorker, my heart goes out to the citizens of this wonderful city in these dire straits. Let's see what questions we have from the viewers. As you know, all of you watching, you can submit questions to the panelists, to the experts on the We Don't Have Time app. Nick Nuttall.
Yes, hi.
What do we have?
Yeah, well, lots of people really enjoyed that, Professor Sachs. One question here from Marcus Lutterman. I don't know where Marcus is based, but he says, during this conference this week, many good ideas have been presented. But he gets back a little bit to the theme you had before. We do have some countries that politically don't seem to want to take action. Brazil, Russia, USA, Hungary, Poland, Australia, and some others. What do we do about these countries that are not prepared to to play game on sorting out the climate change problem?
Thank you very much. We need to call out these countries for what they are. They are corrupt politics. They are countries where the oil, gas, and coal industry dominates. The English-speaking world is bedeviled by Rupert Murdoch, who is really a kind of personification of the evil of this system. He is a propagandist for power. In the United States, in Australia, his newspapers and television stations peddle lies repeatedly and topple governments that try to do things. I don't think that there is a magic solution except to mobilize people of goodwill and rationality to say that the Trumps, the Bolsonaros, and the others of this world are absolutely committing crimes against humanity. And we don't tolerate this, because the vast majority of humanity wants action, knows the truth, isn't corrupted by the vested interests. And we have to push our politics in the direction of decency and honesty. In the United States, we're working hard at that. Our political system got taken over by the corporate lobbies years ago. It's been broken for a long time. That's why we have Trump. We're in a big, big battle, but this is a global battle.
Thank you, Professor Sachs. How about the role of the civil society, civil organizations in this time and place? Do we have a momentum here for organizations that work with climate action?
Of course, civil society has played a huge role. Greta has played a huge role in mobilizing young people around the world. I want young people to come forward with solutions. The protests have been hugely important. Now young people, I think, can also get out the spreadsheets and show their politicians and society in general, here's what we really should do. Here's how we can decarbonize. Here's how we can move to a zero emission economy. The more we put the solutions clearly in view and explain them and go to the rational part of our psyches in society, the faster we're going to get there. And I think civil society has a huge role to play in this.
Thank you. How about some more questions from the viewers?
Yeah, we've got one question here from somebody who is called Simran Kunt, and he says, we're all stuck at home, but we're seeing nature is flourishing in its beauty day by day, which kind of probably echoes a little bit back to your point. And I suppose the additional question would be that maybe we'll find a cure for COVID-19, but we're not going to find a cure for the planet, are we, if we don't actually deal with climate change in, 8 or 9 years? So,
well, we have this irony that air pollution is at its lowest levels and emissions are at their lowest levels in decades, probably because of the decrease of the polluting economic activities as a result of this pandemic. That is not really a silver lining, but it is an indication to us that it is possible to get our bad behavior under control. We should take note that what has diminished is our fossil fuel use during this period. That has cleared the air and it has reduced the emissions. We can keep it that way by recovering from this pandemic through the expansion of renewable energy and shutting down all of this excess hydrocarbon production. It was notable in the United States yesterday, oil reached negative $30 a barrel. Unbelievable. What it means is they couldn't get rid of the oil because there's no place to store it right now. They're pumping too much oil. That's been true for a generation, not just because of the COVID response. Let us think as we build out of this epidemic that we should build out cleanly, and we can do that, and we can see some ways to do that from the crisis itself.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, with us from New York, for sharing your insights. And take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
In the next segment, we will share with you Sorry, first we have some climate reviews. You're always welcome on the app to share your climate reviews and ideas. So let's look at some climate reviews.
The Finnish retailer S Group has launched a calculator which indicates the carbon footprint of the food you've purchased. The service is a part of the company's app service and has been developed in cooperation with top experts at Natural Resources Institute Finland. Outdoor clothing company Patagonia is getting to the bottom of microfibers. Together with industry partners, they have commissioned Oceanwise Plastic Lab to investigate the tiny textile particles that shed from garments over their lifetime. The findings can be used to better understand how microfibers end up in the oceans. The Trump administration plans to roll back fuel efficiency standards. The new rule would allow cars on American roads to emit nearly 1 billion tons more carbon dioxide than they would have under the current standards. Swedish retail giant IKEA has set an ambitious target to make all their products renewable or made from recycled material by 2030. The company is investing 200 million euros to reach this goal and become climate positive. Big tech is helping big oil. Amazon, Google, and Microsoft have all struck billion-dollar deals to provide automation, cloud, and AI services to some of the world's biggest oil companies. The deals are explicitly aimed at rendering oil and gas extraction operations more profitable. Yes, it's true. Some fashion brands actually destroy end-of-season clothing rather than putting them on sale. They do this to retain exclusivity and ridiculous prices. But many brands, for instance Burberry, are now reconsidering this practice, thanks to consumer backlash. Let's end on a positive note. The European Commission recently proposed 350 million euros to market-leading innovation, which contributes to the goals of the European Green Deal. Our consumption is part of the problem, but also the focus of a lot of exciting innovation for sustainable production and business models. To agree and share these climate reviews, look in the We Don't Have Time app, where you also can create climate reviews of your own.
We're now moving on to listen to 3 different solutions, and then after that a panel, which will be expert commentated by Professor Jeffrey Sachs. And the first solution is from Electrolux.
This is Daniel Wentz, Vice President at Electrolux, whose work entails creating circular business models for home appliances, breaking an unsustainable one-to-one bond between customer and product. When a customer ends their service with the product, it's returned for refurbishment, for another paying customer's use, or for responsible disposal. By doing this, Electrolux is creating more value, using fewer resources, and steering strategy toward higher product quality and improved hardware design for refurbishment. Daniel is the creator of Electrolux's Pure i9.2 robotic circular economy vacuum cleaner, an example of how Electrolux uses software and data to drive change for the better.
Hi there, Daniel. Thanks for being with us. Please tell us a little bit more about the solution.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me, and very nice agenda and day you have put together. Highly appreciated. Basically, what we're trying to do is shift the unit of consumption away from the physical box that users typically go out to retailers to buy, to the outcome of what the product is doing. In this case, it's delivering clean floor space. So we wanted to understand if we could rather, peg our business model on the outcome instead of the physical product. Would we be able to provide a better service for our users, a better price for that unit, use less units and still produce equivalent results for the company, and understand if we can manage and scrap these units in a 100% sustainable way versus having question marks of whether or how you dispose lithium-ion batteries, which is part of these products as a private personal consumer, right? So that was kind of some of the overarching dimensions that we wanted to understand when we started out this journey.
Wonderful work. Thank you very much. And you'll be back shortly in the panel. Let's now move to the next solution. It's a solution from Signify.
Meet Hari Verhar, Head of Global Public and Government Affairs at Signify, which is successfully helping to move the global lighting sector to sustainability. In 2006, lighting consumed 19% of global electricity. Last year, this was down to 13%, with a further decrease to 8% projected by 2030, despite the growing global population using 35% more light in that period. Signify has been ranked number 1 in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index for 3 years and is on track to become carbon neutral by the end of 2020. Harry is a past recipient of the UN Leader of Change Award and Alliance to Save Energy's Energy Efficiency Visionary Award.
Hello, Harry. Great to have you with us. Please elaborate on what you're doing.
Yeah, so maybe to build in a few words on the words of Jeff Sachs. I'm a concerned optimist. So I'm an optimist in the sense that I think nothing can stop sustainable development, clean technology, energy efficiency, LED lighting. But I'm very concerned, I think, as all of us on this webinar, because the pace of change is far too slow. This is also why tackling climate change is our number 1 priority. And in a sense, it links broader to creating a circular society. And you saw from the video some of the work that has happened in the sector. So we've been leading the sector away from conventional lighting. It's amazing to imagine that in the end of 2006, when we called for the global phase out of incandescent light bulbs, which was quite a thing at the time, and it's now sheer logic, that 2/3 of our sales volume was incandescent light bulbs, and today we are 80% LED. And end of this year, early next year, all the LEDs will be IoT connected or connectable. So what I'm seeing there, and this brings those benefits of moving down to 8% of electricity, which is a benefit of 1,400 megatons of carbon reduction. But this also shows that where we are concerned about the pace of change, that also change for the better is not linear, but it can go exponential. So in that sense, we are using this example to also, of course, to further our own work and the work with the lighting sector, but also to inspire others, so that the world is not one of doom and gloom, but the future is as much in our hands as was the past. You see there also that if we focus on people benefits, which is even more visible, I think, the relevance of that in this COVID pandemic, that if we focus on that, then I'm convinced that if people see that in the end this creates a more, let's say, a higher quality of living environment, clean air, lower energy bills, but also a more comfortable home or a more productive workspace. We see numbers where with LED lighting, traffic accidents go down in cities. Crime can be detected by sound triangulation. We see in schools that children learn more effectively. And so I think if we succeed in conveying those types of messages, that people in larger numbers through their voting and buying behavior will increase the speed of change. And this is really, I think, at the center of our attention.
The next speaker is with us here live. Let's see her introduction first.
Eva Karlsson is CEO of Houdini Sportswear, a rapidly growing Swedish outdoor brand and trailblazer in corporate responsibility. Houdini has faced the challenges of linear design, overconsumption, and humanity's disconnection from nature with state-of-the-art circular products, products as service solution, and a co-creative community for open source innovating and inspiring reconnection to nature. Among many other sustainability goals, Houdini aims for 100% of their products to be circular by 2020's end and to have 100% of their value chain circular by 2030. As the leader of Houdini, Eva's focus is on untapped opportunities and designing abundant value into attractive, regenerative lifestyle solutions.
Hello, Eva. Great to have you with us.
Great to be
Please
here.
tell us a little bit more about Houdini.
Well, we're a Swedish outdoor brand working on the global market. And we've been designing for circularity since 2001, which means that we've been looking at our entire universe or ecosystem from a circular standpoint. How can we create a flow of materials that is circular? How can we create a flow of products that is circular through business models, for instance, sharing, rental, subscription, and so forth. And then also the last, and I think quite important, is not at all the material stuff, but rather how can we share knowledge and inspiration towards moving towards a more sustainable way of living.
You've been very early on working with this in Sweden and our region, and also globally. Would you say that you have gotten many followers after you're sort of plowed the way?
Yes, indeed, we do. And I don't think our international expansion would have been even possible without this quite radical take on circular and moving from a sustainable or slightly more sustainable business doing less bad to actually trying to achieve good. I think that's really important. But I'd like to add that the way we build our brand and our products, it's not only for the sustainably conscious. We have to create the best product that everybody wants to use and everybody wants to bring on their adventures. And that means that we cater to the needs and desires of people who don't really yet care about sustainability. And that's how we can shift even more in terms of culture.
Well, thank you for your work. Let's bring back the panel. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Daniel, and Harry. And let's see what reflections Professor Jeffrey Sachs has on these three presentations.
Excuse me, I got disconnected by mistake.
That's
I thought
fine.
my session was over. So if the others could go, then I will join in as the third.
Absolutely. So how important is it to have, let's look at this way. How important is it, Harry, Daniel, and also Professor Jeffrey Sachs, of course, and Eva, to have a common definition of what is circular economy? Harry,
Well, maybe,
go ahead.
Maybe I'll start off with a few words. For us, a circular economy is indeed a model where we go from linear consumption-based, where GDP is the performance indicator, to one that looks at quality of life, where we move from more is better to a world where better is best. But we also focus on what does it mean for people. And then, of course, if you go to zero carbon, if you follow all the SDGs, and then those are the goals. As a company, we will be carbon neutral later this year. And we see simply that it's good for business, it's good for our customers, it's good for society. So I think if we capture the fact that those ambition levels should be people-focused, benefits, zero carbon, I think then, and we highlight, as I mentioned before, the benefits that what it means for people, then I think that's our compass, and SDGs are our dashboard.
Thank you. Daniel, would you like to add something to that definition?
Yeah, there are a couple of dimensions that I think is very important when we talk about circularity here. And if we take one step back, traditionally traditionally evolution, value creation has always gone hand in hand since the dawn of the industrial society, more or less. And traditionally, value creation and resource consumption was very tightly bundled. You produced one and you consumed one. And then the game was about understanding how to maximize the profit with better logistics or cheaper manufacturing or such industrial traits. Now, software technology and some other technologies entering the stage is driving the unbundling of value creation and resource consumption. I think this fundamentally is a macro trend that we are just seeing the starting phases of, and that will play out much more in the coming cycles. In other words, with satisfying more users with better products and keeping their resource consumption flat, more or less. And that will also, fundamentally improve the experience the user might have with the product and brand, and also in the best cases lead to a better financial situation for both consumers and corporates alike.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Reflections from Professor Sachs on these companies, on what they just said, please.
I'd like to just touch on the theme of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement being good for business. It comes to the question both of what is value and what is sustainability from a business point of view. Value in our accounting sense is what shows up as profits in the short term. But that's not social value, that's private value. And the whole problem with the climate change, for example, is that the social value of resources like oil and coal are negative, but they show up as value on the balance sheet in the short term. That leads to a dilemma for business. Do we go after the business profits as recorded in the interests of the shareholders, or do we go after social value? I just would like to say that that dilemma is much less intense than it sometimes is made out to be, because businesses which knowingly pursue products that are harmful for society, in the end, pay a terrible price for that, not only morally, but practically. The coal industry is going bankrupt, as it should, by the way. It should have phased out in an organized way, but it's being pushed to bankruptcy. The oil and gas industry, extraordinarily arrogant, especially in the United States, has had terrible returns for the shareholders for years, and now devastating returns given the current economic environment. Companies that go for the real social value are not fighting society or faking it. They're actually with the wind in the sails, as it were, for a long-term future. So I would like to emphasize that this supposed tension, do we go for private profit or do we go for the social good, in practice is not a tension. Companies that oppose the social good end up in the trash heap of history and the trash heap of the economy itself. And only those companies that are going along with the true social good are the ones that are going to have a long-term future.
Thank you very much. Eva, at Houdini, you use a special framework. It's called the Planetary Boundaries Framework. How important is it for you to have a framework in this context?
It's extremely important. And I'd like to go back to the question you had earlier about the circular definition. I think we need to have, or I'm sure that we need to have a systemic perspective. So in terms of the ecosystem or the planetary system, we need to understand the system in its entirety. Not only carbon, but biodiversity, land system, ocean, and so forth. And in the same sense, I think that the transition towards circular needs to be looked upon in a systemic way. It's social, like you mentioned, it's individual, it's the flow of materials, it's the flow of products or services, and it's the flow of knowledge. So the systemic approach. But then going back to planetary boundaries, I think when we did the first assessment, started in 2015 and finalized it in 2018, so it's on our website if you want to look at it. It was because two things. We need to understand our impact on the planetary system in order to address it and evolve to eliminate our negative impact and contribute positively. That knowledge is key, of course. But then also in our industry, fashion, outdoor, whatever, products for consumer goods in general, to only focus on carbon, which has been the case for quite a few years now, it can lead to greenwashing internally. If you don't understand the systemic view and take that into consideration when you move from one material to another, for instance, you might actually just shift the bad to somewhere else without even knowing it. So the systemic perspective is absolutely essential.
Thank you. Let's invite Nick Nuttall up on stage because he's the master of taking in questions from the audience.
Yeah. So a lot of questions on this. I'll try and just combine a couple. You don't have to answer them all, by the way. Just maybe choose a bit or something. Two questions about money. Somebody called Malavika has said that basically, as Greta said, living sustainably, choosing sustainable products costs lots of money. What can be done about that? How do we get sustainable products and services down? Somebody called Rocco in Berlin, I think it is, saying that he's kind of broke. He'd like to use the little money he can to do a good thing for the environment, but probably like the previous speaker, a bit worried that some of these things are a bit expensive. And one last question from Kai Kim Cheng, who says, once we get circularity, is the trick then to actually slow the speed of the circle? That's a very interesting philosophical question.
It is.
Okay,
Let's
anybody
stop
want to
there.
take any of
Great.
those questions?
Let's bring back the panel. Jump in.
Maybe to start with the easiest example. So when we phased out the incandescent light bulb, we actually said the cheapest lamp is the most expensive. And I think that goes for many of the examples of a fossil fuel-based economy. Initially, things may seem attractive from the price tag perspective, but if you look at the whole life cycle performance, then in the end, they're going to be most expensive for this as well as for next generations. And maybe just one little remark that I'd like to add to that. When we talk about circularity, this is not about, let's say, reinventing capitalism or launching disguised socialism. I think this is really by moving to a new model of socioeconomic development that I would call sustainalism. So from product to service, from invoicing to leasing, from GDP to quality of life. I think if we capture that, and that is something that is good for all of us, then we can get faster progress.
Thank you very much. Who would like to answer any of the other questions? Jump in.
Yeah, maybe I would jump in just briefly to say that all of the evidence and logic is that moving to a sustainable energy system is going to be very low cost, maybe no cost at all compared to the baseline of continuing with our fossil fuel-based energy system. The good news and very practical news is that the costs of renewable energy have declined to the point where they're essentially the same and in many cases lower than the fossil fuel alternatives. This doesn't mean that they easily get adopted, because that also depends on politics and regulation. But the cost of shifting to a sustainable energy system is very, very low. And if there is a cost, it's a cost that seems, by the evidence, to be less than 1% of measured national income per year. Certainly a cost far lower than the cost of not doing this. But in general, we should not think that sustainability means high and unaffordable costs. The issues of inequality of income are a different issue. There will be people in a market system, even in a mixed system, that need help. That's different from the costs of moving to sustainability.
Well, thank you very much. Let's take one last answer. I know you were waving up there, Daniel.
Yeah. Just to add a bit here. I think in general, users' preferences and definition of value is also evolving. You can take the perspective of bytes and atoms, right? So we have been in the industrial economy where atoms and creating and distributing atoms around the globe in terms of boxes that people, consumers buy, has been the paradigm of value creation, right? So now I think more and more you will see that value definition for consumers, at least users, moving into software. So bytes are cheaper to produce, they scale better, and they do not cost as much in terms of carbon or any measure to distribute. So I foresee that for parts of these aspects, the cycle will be slower because you will have a value distribution of the product that moves from one end to another end in the kind of technology stack of the product.
Thank you very much, all three of you, and Eva in the studio here. If it's possible for you, please answer some of the questions on the app, because I know Nick has a few more that did not get answered.
Loads of them.
Loads of them. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your thoughts. And thank you, Eva, for coming to the studio.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We're now moving on to the next segment. We're going to look at more doers and thinkers.
Hello, I'm from the government with an important message as we enter the third decade of the 21st century. Things are going, fine. Overall, the Amazon is fine, half of Africa is fine, so is the Arctic, Indonesia, Spain, Greece, even Greenland's on fucking fire. I mean fine. Scientists have coined a new term for this stage of climate change we're entering. we're fucked. Unlike the previous stage, which climate scientists called listen to us or we might be fucked, we're fucked is happening and in your lifetime. This is thanks to us wasting decades piss-farting around at climate summits with non-binding emission targets, whilst handing out subsidies to climate criminals, obstructing renewables, and generally not giving a shit that rising CO2 levels are about to trigger what scientists call feedback loops. A feedback loop is the scientific term for when a species uses its own ignorance to screw itself and everything else around it so hard that its own planet tells it to git fo. Some people are already experiencing we're fucked, such as these Pacific nations facing rising sea levels, who recently begged Australia to please stop burning coal, to which Australia responded, get fucked. The combination of we're fucked and get fucked will cause wars to break out over access to food and water, except in America, where the chosen one will just nuke hunger. Would you like to know more? But please don't panic. If the realization that we're fucked troubles you, why not ride a bike to work, have shorter showers, or send thoughts and prayers? Just don't join the global climate strike this September or Extinction Rebellion in October, because a sustained collective movement would force us to take drastic action and turn this ship around, which might just be doable if enough of you demand it. Or you could go to Area 51 and demand to see the aliens, in which case, we're definitely fucked. This has been a message from your local government franchise, authorized by the Department for Going Gentle into that good night.
And this was, of course, an ad from the Juice Media, ever inspiring. We're moving on to listen to two doers and thinkers, and we're going to start with a presentation from Kevin Noon.
This is Kevin Noon, a professor of environmental science at Stockholm University. Kevin works with issues of climate, sustainability, and community science, connecting groups that don't normally interact and decreasing the distance between science and decision support.
Hello. Thank you for the organizers for allowing me the opportunity to be here. It's a real honor to be among the people speaking at this conference.
Great to have you with us, Kevin. You have our attention.
Thank you. What I'd like to do today is to talk about the kinds of things that we do to change the environment around us, to try to find out how that works, but to talk also about the drivers of those changes in their environment. And one of those drivers is, of course, our economic system. But before we get to the economic system and to all of these graphs that I have on the slide here, I'd like to take just a second to reflect upon the pandemic that we find ourselves in and the COVID-19 virus that has claimed more than 170,000 lives so far. And that's caused immense disruptions in our society and our economy. It's also made us painfully aware of exponential growth. And Jeffrey Sachs mentioned that earlier in his presentation. And a lot of the plots that you see on this slide show that kind of exponential growth. We've also talked a lot about flattening that exponential growth. And if we go back to that plot, these curves that you see here are carbon dioxide, the blue one here on the right-hand side, growing exponentially. Ocean acidification also growing very rapidly. On the left-hand side, you have GDP, gross domestic product, primary energy use, and other socio-ecological trends. Now, in terms of the COVID virus, we want to plane out these graphs. We want to flatten the curves in order to save the vulnerable members of our society, like the elderly. But just like the COVID curves, we need to flatten these curves. But here we need to do it for our youth because they are very vulnerable to the future. So what I wanted to do today is make 2 points. First, we need an economic system that works for all the citizens and ecosystems of our single planet Earth. And we need metrics for that economic system that measure what are truly valuable. Now, this may sound naive or pie in the sky, but it actually can be very practical. In terms of the first, colleagues John Fullerton and Hunter Lovins and others have described what they call a regenerative economy. It's based on 8 different principles. And I won't go through all 8 of them today, but perhaps just 2. The first, the right relationship. We have an economy that is meant to help us build a society. It's the society doesn't drive the economy. We want the economy to help us build a society. And yet both society and economy are embedded and require functional, resilient ecosystems. So we have to have that relationship right. The third one, wealth viewed holistically. We need to go beyond simply thinking about wealth as the accumulation of stuff or the accumulation of capital, and look at it as the accumulation of well-being, and not just for a few, but for everyone. And if we look at the second, we need measures of that socio-ecological well-being that go beyond simply measuring cash flow or GDP or economic production. And in fact, if you look at the original report here, published in 1934, Simon Kuznets and company wrote in that report, don't use this particular metric as the only thing for measuring well-being. It's not good enough. Luckily, there are all alternatives, like the Inclusive Wealth Index from the United Nations or the Genuine Progress Indicator here shown on the right. We need better metrics. We have them. We need to implement them. And finally, we really need to rediscover our planet Earth. There's a wonderful quote from William Anders, the Apollo 8 astronaut, who in 1968 said that we came all this way to explore the moon, and the most important thing is that we discovered the Earth. So let's rediscover the Earth and create an economic system that serves our one planet and all of its residents. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Kevin Noon. I know we have questions from the viewers, and we have Nick Nuttall with us from Earth Day.
Hello, Kevin. So we got a question here from a viewer who's interested in this whole area of beyond GDP. I think what he's trying to say is that we did have a major effort only a few years ago to try and basically go beyond GDP with a new indicator of wealth that factored in environmental and social factors. Why did that stall, or has it stalled? I mean, when can we expect to have a new indicator of wealth, Kevin?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure that effort has stalled, but if we go back to the exponential growth curves, I think we're still on the very, very flat part of that curve. Mm-hmm. There are areas and countries, for instance, Finland has explored using the global, one of these indices. Various different cities in the United States and around the world have explored using these indices, but it hasn't replaced using GDP at the national level, where all of this accounting really comes to the fore. So I hope that there will be an increasing momentum soon.
Can I just say one thing, Katarina?
Absolutely.
That picture that you just showed of the Earth from space from 1968 was in fact the emotional trigger that actually led to the first Earth Day in 1970. Which is why we're using the hashtag Earthrise, because some people call this picture the blue marble and some call it Earthrise, don't they? So that's why we're using that again, because of that space picture. Yeah.
More questions?
Exactly.
Well, there will be a couple of questions which maybe, Kevin, you could just refer to, because they're building up over a long time here. But people talk about, governments and the role of governments, but some people talk about more decentralized government as being a way to actually deal with these kinds of issues you're talking about in terms of a new concept of wealth. Do you think there is a role for the cities in this moving to a different kind of economy?
Oh, absolutely. In a previous job, the organization I represented was an observer to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And I'm an optimist by nature, but I began to be a bit pessimistic of actually making progress at a national level where you required 190 nations to agree on something. A lot is happening at the level of cities and regions. And the more that we can do to encourage that, to support that, to expand that work, the better off we're going to be. I'm really enthused about what can happen at a city level and the rapidity that things can happen at the city level compared to national agreements.
And that came from Narushima, by the way, so just so we know.
Well, thank you. A final question to you from me, Kevin Noon. You're very active in conveying science to stakeholders and to the public. How can we get even more science out to decision makers and also to the public, and especially talking about circular economy and consumption? That's the topic of today.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I wish I had a very good answer to it. The only answer I have is I think we need to empower people like me, scientists, to do that more often without taking away their official science card. We don't do that at the moment, and our structures, particularly within the university system around the world, are such that scientists are supposed to publish stuff in really obscure journals, and that's where their job ends. We need to change that structure.
Yes, we do, because we need you desperately. Well, thank you very much, Kevin Noon, for sharing your thoughts and your insights.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Meet Alexandra Davidsson. She heads the Swedish Association of Responsible Consumption, a non-profit that raises awareness of how consumers can make more sustainable choices, and where she organizes the global circular campaign #White Monday that's gaining momentum every year.
Thank you so much for...
Hi, Alexandra.
Oh, sorry, hi.
Great to have you with us. You have our attention.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I feel really, really honored about this. So today, humanity is using 75% more resources than the Earth can handle. And we need to start living on the one planet that we do have. Yeah, we need to start living within the boundaries of the one planet that we have, right? But our living and our consumption patterns are contributing to these numbers, where the Global Footprint Network is calculating the overshoot day, happening earlier and earlier each year. This year, in this crisis we're in, we'll see when it will happen. But consumption in itself is not a bad thing. The problem is that we overconsume stuff that we don't really need. And perhaps the most symbolic day for our overconsumption is Black Friday. This is what the founder of the campaign, Henning Gillberg, together with his colleague, thought in 2017. They started to play an opposite game of Black Friday. They used the basis of yin and yang to see how can we create a better, a solution for the Black Friday overconsumption. So the opposite of linear economy is circular economy. So it has to be circular campaign, and the opposite of black is white, and the opposite of Friday is Monday. And you can also look at this campaign as a pendulum right here. Like Black Friday contributes a lot to growth, and perhaps Buy Nothing Day is not on that particular day. This is a really, has been a campaign existing since 1992, founded in Canada, I think. But then in the middle, there is White Monday, the solution. And pretty quickly, the organization I'm working for joined to organize this campaign together with the founder in 2018 and 2019. And the most, everybody can join this campaign, whether you're a circular company or not. But you have to follow 3 rules. First rule is that you have to say no to Black Friday. On White Monday, the Monday before Black Friday this year, the 23rd of November, you'll have to post in your social media with the hashtag White Monday. And 3, if you want to post a circular deal where consumers, as you and I, can shop with good conscience, then it has to be 100% circular. And this campaign is built on a participatory model, where everyone in it owns it. We don't decide how you should communicate about this. And I think this is the reason behind the success of this campaign. Last year, over 550 organizations, companies, and influencers joined the campaign. And it spread from Sweden to 23 countries worldwide. And the campaign hashtag was exposed over 74 million times. And I hope you want to join us. You can go into whitemonday.info, because it's really time that we go from a linear economy into a circular economy, we need to make sure that our consumption and living patterns doesn't have a snowball effect, but we have to turn that into a circle instead. And perhaps the consumer of the future might really be a circulant. And I join the campaign, and let's change this. Like, why should we follow the stream when we all can create the wave together?
Well, thank you so much, Alexandra Davidsson. I just love the White Monday. In the wake of this pandemic, do you think the consumer behavior will be changed much, and what momentum do we have as consumers right now?
Yes, I do believe that. I do believe that we have an opportunity now. Like, we're all going inside ourselves. Maybe we are rediscovering ourselves and our own voices and our own values. What is sure now is that the emissions are decreasing, and we can. Do we really want to go back to business as usual, or like should we use this opportunity when nothing is for certain, everything is possible, right?
They just said last question, then they're heading over.
Well, thank you very much, Alexandra Davidsson, for coming to us via the Zoom link, and keep up your wonderful work. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Shutta. Hello, Shutta. How are you today?
I'm doing excellent, Katarina. How's it been in Stockholm so far?
Very interesting, very exciting. And I know for sure that you have some fascinating, very interesting guests lined up in your program today.
Yes, we really do. We have the architect of the Paris Accords. We have the godmother of climate and security. We have 2 youth activists, and we have a climate change journalist. So without further ado, let's get right into a woman who needs very little introduction, Christiana Figueres.
Meet Christiana Figueres. After 6 years as Executive Secretary for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, she's now a founding partner of Global Optimism, which works for social and environmental change by shifting pessimism to optimism.
Christiana, it is such a thrill for us to have you here today. It's great to see you. I saw you last week on an NBC segment we had a chance to do together. You just released a book, The Future We Choose, and you would have been on a book tour. But like everyone else around the world, we are in this lockdown. Tell us a little bit about how this has really affected your life. And yet, how do you keep your head above water? How do you stay positive? What is the message you would like to kick off our segment together with?
Well, Svante, yes, thank you very much. Thank you for today. Thank you for last week. And yes, just before the pandemic broke out, my co-author and I published The Future We Choose. And we were on a book tour when we had to interrupt everything and travel home, each of us to our respective homes in England and Costa Rica, so that we could be in lockdown with our families, which has been a good thing in some ways, to spend more time with families, but has also been very challenging as we continue to bring message in very different ways. Now, Sveta, the title that we chose for that book is The Future We Choose. And what we argue in the book is that we do have both the opportunity and the responsibility to intentionally choose the future that we want. That message has never been as true or as urgent as it is now in the middle of the COVID crisis. The fact is that this crisis has forced us to make a torturous choice between saving lives and saving livelihoods. That is a no-win choice. We are trying to save some lives by locking down everyone and paralyzing the economy. But the effect is that we may be impoverishing even more people than we had before. And I've heard numbers even up to 300 million more people into extreme poverty because of the economic paralysis. That is a choice, Sveta, that we should never have to do. That is not a choice that we have. And as we address climate change, and interestingly, what we're living right now is almost a page out of our book, because these conditions of having to protect ourselves against outside forces and certainly health threats are very much what we will be seeing under climate change. So we have to be able to understand that these risks, the ones that we're dealing with now under COVID, are very interesting type risks. They are high probability, high impact risks. And the big lesson learned is that if we do not address them in a timely fashion, the delay is very costly. That is true for COVID-19, and it is true for climate change. The reason why we actually have to continue working for a positive resolution, and this comes back to my optimism, which I think is still possible to have a positive resolution, is because the recovery packages that are already being designed that will come after relief and social protection, the recovery packages could go up to $10 to $20 trillion. At that level of fresh capital injection into the economy, we will basically be defining the contours of the new economy for decades to come. Hence, we are choosing our future. This is the future that we choose. Those recovery packages will define whether in the future we will have to choose between lives and livelihoods, or whether we can actually have both, which is what we argue for. Those recovery packages, if they are designed to be inclusive, number one, and secondly, to be low carbon, including the circular economy aspects, then we will be able to both save lives and save livelihoods. A very different resolution to the one that we are seeing right now. So that is why we are continuing to be optimistic, but not naively so, because those recovery packages are not defined yet. It is precisely the definition of those packages that will determine whether, in facing a high probability and high impact risk, we have a thoughtful response that will have a high probability and high impact to choose the world that we want and build back better.
So you're really talking about a solution that commensurates with the reality and the magnitude of the risk that we face as a global collective public. And you've managed to put a smile on my face in these dark times. And I'm sure that's true for so many viewers who are watching from around the world. Tell us, is what you're proposing, will it also help those most vulnerable with us? Because you've made the case so passionately in the past, and you continue to do so, that we're really only as strong as those most vulnerable among us.
Well, absolutely. And let me draw, the parallel. If we have one person infected with COVID-19, everyone on this planet is actually threatened with it. We have finally understood that we are only as strong as the most vulnerable. That is true for COVID-19. It's also true for climate, because as long as we are having natural disasters in one part of the world, we are definitely will be having them in every part of the world. There is no such thing that natural disasters caused by climate, are going to be contained in only one region or one geography. And of course, they always hit the most vulnerable, because those are the people, least responsible for having caused climate change, but they're also the ones that have the least capacity to deal with the high impacts of climate change. The poor, women, children, discapacitated, all of those are, again, the most vulnerable. And hence, the recovery packages cannot be blind to inequality. Recovery packages have to have two guiding stars. One is addressing inequality, and the second is addressing the long-term growth and economic prosperity and well-being standards that we want for everyone on this planet.
So right after you, we'll be interviewing 2 youth activists who will be talking to us about environmental justice and how that's motivated them to do the work that they've done. And of a generation that just a generation ago you never would have expected to have that level of understanding, acknowledgement, and awareness of the shared environment that we all live in. And so I'm really looking forward to continuing this theme of conversation throughout the rest of this segment. Let's take a question now from Stockholm. We have my colleague Nick Nuttall, who is taking questions from viewers from around the world, and we have one for you, Christiana.
Yeah. Thanks very much indeed, Shweta, and hello, Christiana, and lovely Costa Rica. Just one thing to say to the viewers right now who may be watching on YouTube. YouTube seems to have just shut down our channel for some reason. I hope it's not because they think this is political. This is actually the future of the world. So if they want to have a future, they should switch it back on again. But we will get up that feed very shortly if you're missing it. So watch on Twitter right now. Christiana, one question here from one of the viewers is on the issue of health. And does the COVID-19 give us the way to really deal with the climate question by realizing that people focus on their health perhaps more than on anything else, and that this link between COVID and climate change and the ill health that climate change can also cause, could we harness this to actually get more people on board to take the actions that are necessary?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Very good to see you. For full disclosure, Nick and I used to be colleagues at the Climate Convention, and so we used to colleagues, Nick. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. A very important question for 2 reasons. One, because all the science is very clear that under unabated climate change conditions, we will be having more diseases such as dengue, malaria, chikungunya that already exist, and their geographical reach will expand, but also that we will be having new diseases that will evolve because of the changing temperature and precipitation conditions around the world, including the melting of the permafrost. But just to bring this to today, it's actually very interesting that Harvard just published a few days ago a groundbreaking study that shows that the burning of fossil fuels and the air pollution that is being caused by the burning of fossil fuels, especially in cities, has been compromising respiratory systems of everyone who lives in these polluted cities. And it is, of course, those people who have compromised respiratory systems who are the most susceptible to COVID-19. So there you are, the direct link between fossil fuels, which are at the basis of having caused climate change, and COVID-19, all of it coming back into integration.
Thank you very much.
So this is such a treat to have you here, Christiana, because we can ask you and get some insight into what we can anticipate and hope for out of COP26 in 2021 now. We've talked already about the circular economy, about the inequitable distribution of these impacts, both not just environmental, but health-wise on the global society that we are all a part of. So how do we begin to think about this and address this in the coming year with COP26?
Well, interestingly enough, Sveta, COP26, as we all know, has now been delayed into next year, and the precise date hasn't been set. But I would argue that whatever is being prepared for COP26 pales in comparison to the design of the recovery packages. Or let me put it a different way. If these recovery packages that will go up to $10, $20 trillion are designed in such a way to have the human being the most vulnerable and the impacts of climate change on human beings as their core, then a COP26 can actually harvest all of that, and we will be able to accelerate decarbonization. Of course, we know that this year we're dropping in greenhouse gas emissions by more than 5%, but for the wrong reason. We're dropping because the economy is paralyzed. That's not the way we want to decarbonize our economy. We want to decarbonize the economy by making it a thriving economy, a much more prosperous economy for all, inclusive of all. So the recovery packages are not unlinked to COP26. The purpose of COP26 is to review what has been done on decarbonizing and take the next step. But I would argue right now, the next big step is precisely the design of the recovery packages.
That is such a positive, optimistic, and practical note for us to end this segment with you on. Thank you for everything you have done and continue to do. And we hope that your optimism as is infectious, and this might be a bad joke in this current moment of COVID, but we hope it's infectious because it really truly does reach through the screen and into the ears of the viewers and listeners. Thank you, Christiana.
Thank you, Sveta. Thank you, Nick.
We now turn to two youth activists that co-founded Zero Hour DC, and they are Khadija Kokar and Jansi Medina Tayak. Let's meet them.
This is Khadija Kokar, a student of international affairs who has been a key organizer of the Global Youth Climate Strikes and who co-founded Zero Hour DC, a youth-led intersectional environmental organization in Washington, D.C. This is Jansi Medina Tayak, a young filmmaker bringing attention to how issues of native sovereignty, race, gender, and the environment affect each other. She is also the co-founder of the DC chapter of Zero Hour, a youth-led climate justice organization.
Hello to two young, powerful women who refuse to take no for an answer and are really go-getters. You make me think about what I was doing at your age, and without giving anything away, I definitely do not even want to relate the lack of worry I had at that time compared to some of the things that you have to face on a daily basis, not just climate change, but now COVID. Tell us, what motivated you to get into environmental activism? What started in relation to the efforts that were already going on? How did you fit into the picture? And then what really moved you to take it further? Let's start with you, Khadija.
So I actually started my journey with climate activism in my senior year with a divestment team. So I live near the University of Michigan, so I joined their divestment team and we worked on divesting the school from the fossil fuel industry. And that's still an ongoing process. But I'm so grateful that I was able to have a part in that. And moving from there, I started working on global climate strikes. So the March 15th climate strike last year was the first climate strike that I was a organizer for. And that was also in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where my hometown is. And that's where I am right now because of COVID. And moving into college, I actually moved to DC and I went to school. I go to school at the George Washington University, and I immediately jumped on the train and I started by working for just the general climate movement. And I didn't really have an organization that I completely affiliated with myself with. Moving further in, I kind of found a place at Fridays for Future. And I mean, it was great. I'm really grateful for the opportunities I got. However, I didn't feel like any of the orgs around me were really focusing on the intersectionality and the same struggles of the climate movement that I had been seeing. And so luckily Jansi was on the same page and we came together and made Zero Hour DC, which is a woman of color led intersectional youth environmental organization. And what we try to do that's different from other organizations is we try to really emphasize the intersectionality part and make sure that those voices that aren't usually heard are the ones that are on the front line and they're not being drowned out by these kids who are just jumping on to the climate movement just now. Rather, we're trying to get those voices of experience and people who have been on the front lines out there. And we're trying to kind of interact and engage with our own communities and see what we can do in a more hands-on way. Yeah.
That's awesome. Jansi, how about you? You're ethnically indigenous and Latina. And what parallels did you have to Khadija's experience that was able to bring you both together to co-found this Zero Hour?
Yeah, so I would say environmental activism has always been a really big part of my life. Growing up indigenous, we really value our earth, and I grew up seeing a lot of my sister communities, indigenous communities, being heavily impacted by the climate crisis. And so I really started I'm a senior right now, in high school. I really started my freshman year of high school with the People's Climate Movement, and there I was connected with so many amazing Indigenous and Latinx activists who really shared everything that they were going through with me. And I decided that I really needed to take action as an Indigenous and Latina person. And so after working with People's Climate Movement, I discovered Zero Hour a couple years later. And I was working with them on some of the marches and strikes. But I really felt like we needed to create a space in DC that was for people of DC, not just people surrounding DC, but people who are actually in DC and voices of color that are in DC, because DC is a primarily a city that's primarily people of color. And I felt like we didn't have that kind of representation here in DC. Although we had all these strikes going on at the Capitol, we weren't involving the voices that were actually being impacted. And that's when me and Khadija really joined together to form Zero Hour DC, which is a sister chapter of Zero Hour.
That's right. And we have the founder on our youth advisory board as well, Jamie, who I also had the pleasure of being on the NBC segment with last week, along with Christiana, who's talking about inequitable distribution of these climate change impacts from the top down. And you're working on it really at the ground level, bottom up. So how do you make your voices heard? For those listening, viewers that want to be motivated, that want to say, how can we make a difference? We're just one person. We are one younger demographic person even. You are an example of young people that really were able to make a real sound, a real reverberating echo across the globe in your local efforts. So let's talk about what is the message that you really want to get out there, and how do you inspire young people like yourselves around the world?
Well, I would begin and say that every nonviolent movement has started with the youth. Well, almost all of them historically. And I think that history is a great example to lead by. So if you look at the civil rights movement, if you look at apartheid, all of these begin with the youth, with college students, high schoolers who have that time and energy to put into these movements. And I think that if you are a younger person viewing this and you are wondering how you can get involved, it starts like as small as the tiniest thing that you can do really matters. So if that's starting an environmental organization in your school, if that's starting to compost within your community, that is something. And you like the biggest thing that you need is community mobilization. And it starts on the ground level, and it starts really small. And then it just builds and builds, and you get to see how amazing it goes, like how big it gets and how amazingly it turns out. And I would just say, keep at it. And I mean, the climate community is not very big. So there are always people that you'll run into who will help you connect to someone else that might help you. And it's really just getting yourself out there.
Khadija, that was excellent. And we want to emphasize that everyone can get involved and get engaged. The climate community seems big, but actually we are here to support each other. Jancy, I'd love for you to have the final words. What message would you like viewers to take away from showcasing yourselves as examples, as beacons of those who are really making a dent in this really important movement?
Yeah, I would say it's really about building those relationships with the people around you, and really building your foundation about what is the climate movement really about? What is climate justice really about? And that really comes down to talking to people and hearing their stories and really listening and uplifting voices. A lot of that really starts with just getting yourself educated. You know, that is a huge step that you can take to making your voice heard, is really educating yourself about the issues that are going on. And you can do that by also talking to people in your community. That in itself is making a difference. And from there, once you build that foundation, then you can start making those bigger steps into advocacy, bringing awareness, educating other young people on the things that you have learned. So I would really say, yeah, build those relationships. And that's a great first step as a young person.
Awesome. Thank you to you both. Very inspiring. And please keep up your good hard work virtually until we can actually get back to the streets and do what we do in person. Until then, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Our next guest is no other than Sherry Goodman. She is considered the godmother of climate insecurity and has even coined the term threat multiplier to describe how climate change really enhances the risk of those in the military. And this is something we'll get into after this introduction.
This is Sherry Goodman, Mother of Climate Security and Senior Strategist at the Center for Climate and Security, a nonpartisan institute in which security and military experts focus on threats from global warming.
Sherry, we are so thrilled to have you with us. And we're both here in Washington, D.C., but we're practicing physical distancing and doing this via Zoom. Let's get your message out. We just heard from Christiana about the hope and the optimism that she shares, that she hopes to share with the world. And these youth activists, that just doing what they do on a daily basis is so inspiring to the next generation to really make some collaborative effort and connect with each other, even in this time of COVID. What is your message for the future?
Well, thank you, Sweta. I join in the hopeful messages that Christina and the young youth activists just shared with us, because we are all bringing new and unexpected voices. I love that the young activists are mobilizing the youth of my children's generation on climate. As you well know, over a decade ago, I mobilized military leaders on climate change as a security issue. And that has brought a whole new set of voices, the national security community, military leaders, to address the threat multiplier effect of climate change. But it's not just about knowing what the threats are. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We're living with a threat every day, but we need to make the transition to a better future, both to deal with the pandemic, and at the same time, we can transition to a clean energy, low carbon economy. That is our future. And I think we'll be even more energized. There are even more reasons economically, strategically, globally, and with the voices of the youth activists to do so now.
So you're a civilian, and to be a civilian in the national security enterprise in the United States is quite a feat in itself. And to really be able to get the message out and to recognize that the military is the biggest consumer of energy, biggest single consumer of energy in the world, that there's also a lot of opportunity here to really lead the way and lead some change as we think about transitioning into a cleaner future. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities and how you think about communicating to reaching some of those demographics in the United States that there's a perception globally is resistant to some of this transition that is going to be necessary as we think about a carbon-free future?
Yes, absolutely, Shweta. Change has to happen in multitude of ways. The youth activists are working to change from the outside, which is a very important force. There's also change that happens from transforming institutions from the inside. And that's really what I've been doing for most of my career, working with the military, with the national security community. As you noted, the military is the largest single energy user in the United States. So when it moves to low carbon fuels and when it creates net zero installations and when it reduces its carbon footprint, it is also moving the nation, both by leading by example and in the way it uses energy. And so I've been working with the military as a leader, as an analyst in a variety of capacities over decades now to help transform our most powerful institution in the US. And I'm very proud to say that in the last quarter century, our military has gone from being seen as an environmental laggard today, an environmental and clean energy leader. And that is no more true today in leading, in helping America recover from COVID when we see our National Guard and our forces deployed with our essential health workers to help us get through this pandemic.
That's no small feat, and you have been integral in making that happen. We are taking questions from viewers from around the world, and I'm going to turn to my colleague Nick, who is in our Stockholm studio, who has a question from you from somebody tweeting in.
Yeah, hello. Thanks very much indeed, Shweta. And there's like a whole ton of questions coming through on the a certain issue, which I just want to kind of wrap up together, really. And this is really the question on, before the Paris Agreement and in the years running up to the Paris Agreement, there was a lot of strong statements by military from the United States, from Australia, from the UK, from NATO, even I think the Indian military as well. That voice seems to have been quite quiet recently. Is there a reason for that, Sherry? What do you think is going on there?
Well, thank you, Nick, for that question, because I would like to tell you the story of the new International Military Council on Climate and Security, which was formed last year. It's over 30 nations' militaries represented now in it. I co-lead that effort with the former Dutch Chief of Defense, General Tom Mittendorp. He and I and military leaders from 30 countries now released the very first World Climate Security Report earlier this year in Munich at the Munich Security Conference. And so this is a first annual effort to mobilize military leaders on global climate security.
Fantastic. Great. Love to hear more about it. Thank you.
It's one of many things that is underway with the work that Sherry does. She is also an expert on the Arctic, and we'd love for you to share with our viewers a little bit about what we're learning as the planet warms and what it means for the Arctic and our relationship with other nation states up in that region.
Well, thank you very much. The Arctic is warming faster than any other part of the planet. The sea ice is retreating, the permafrost is collapsing, and temperatures are rising. We've seen record warm temperatures, and increasingly the Arctic is navigable. Russia plans a toll road across its northern sea route where it hopes to reroute shipping instead of moving through Asia and the Middle East across the Russian Arctic from ports in Asia to Europe. China is building its Polar Silk Road, an extension of the Belt and Road Initiative, hoping to ship from Shanghai to Hamburg. And we have many changes occurring in the region at this time. And it's one where, because of climate change, we now see growing geostrategic competition of increasing urgent importance.
I wanted to highlight that as an example because it really is a global issue that a lot of, especially Americans, don't necessarily perceive. And that's been some of the difficulty that communicators and those who have been working on this concept of responsibility to prepare. We have the science, we have more knowledge than ever, and that is power. And that can really give us that proactive preparedness to get ahead of some of these geopolitical conflicts that potentially are in the horizon for us. And so how have you used examples like the Arctic and others to really make the story and the case and this narrative really hit home for those who potentially might be resistant to hearing that this is a very real threat and this is a security threat? Using that concept in itself is something that I think goes a long way for reaching some of the American public.
Well, right. One of the examples we use at the Center for Climate and Security and the Council on Strategic Risks is scenarios to give people a sense of what could actually happen. And this week, in addition to the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, we're also observing 10 years since the Deepwater Horizon Gulf spill. And that was the largest oil spill in American history. And so there have been a lot of lessons learned being shared online and in various forums on the Deepwater Horizon spill in the US this week. And one of the most important lessons is what you just say, the responsibility to prepare and prevent. And last year at the Center for Climate and Security, we conducted a scenario to look at the changing Arctic. What would happen if there is a shipping accident in the Bering Strait between the United States and Russia, where they are only 30 miles apart? What if there's an oil spill? What if there's an accident with a nuclear icebreaker? These are matters for which we are today unprepared. And sometimes we suffer from a failure of imagination because we fail to imagine how the pandemic could hit the country so hard, even though there had been a lot of preparation done by key organizations. The economic fallout of this pandemic, for example, has been beyond what even the most dedicated scenario planners had envisioned.
Yes, and we've talked about this informally quite a bit, and we see the parallels between COVID and climate change, really in terms of complacency when nothing is happening. It seems slow moving, it seems far away, despite the science knowledge being there and various expert communities making the effort to ensure that everything is put in place for not if, but when an impact of climate change hits, not if, but when we have an infectious disease outbreak. So I really appreciate you joining me to reinforce that message. We have more knowledge than we've ever had, and it gives us that propensity to be prepared better than we've ever had before. Sherry.
Exactly. And Sweat, I'd just like to finish perhaps with sharing with your audience that we also need to be prepared, and we need to put Americans and citizens around the world back to work. So one of the important concepts is a citizens' environmental and energy corps, modeled after the New Deal's Civilian Conservation Corps. And I think this is an important idea in the United States, perhaps elsewhere around the world, to enable public service to help us transform to a clean energy, low carbon economy by putting citizens to work in that industry as we make this transition. It's an exciting opportunity. I hope our youth and other activists will join and seize on this initiative, which we've put forth in some recent papers in the Hill. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sherry. We truly appreciate your contribution to this.
Thank you, Sweta.
Moving along, we are now bringing in a climate change reporter who is also the host of the Political Climate podcast. Her name is Julia Piper. Let's meet her now.
Meet Julia Piper. She covers the global clean energy transition on Green Tech Media and is host and producer for Political Climate, a bipartisan podcast on energy and environmental issues in America and around the world.
Julia, thank you so much for joining us today from California. So it's quite early for you. We appreciate this.
Happy to do it.
Thank you for joining us. So we've heard from a fabulous lineup of women today. That really wasn't necessarily planned, but it's how it turned out. We have women leaders at the governance level like Sherry Goodman and Christiana Figueres, and we have young women activists. You are a female reporter on climate. You cover a spectrum of issues, and you're also a fellow with me at the Atlantic Council, really focusing in on energy. Can you talk to me a little bit about your experience? And really, a lot of the theme today has been this inequitable distribution of impacts and the impact on those who have been disenfranchised, minority groups, those more vulnerable. You've covered a lot of these stories. Please talk to us a little bit about it.
Yeah, thank you, Shweta. I really appreciate it. Thanks to We Don't Have Time. Yeah, I mean, I cover the energy transition, and I often notice that I'm still one of a few women in the room or on a panel, say. And so there's definitely a lack of diversity still, even in this emerging clean energy sector. It's been an issue in the legacy fossil fuel industry. And it's something that I think the clean energy economy writ large is going to have to think a lot about, because it's going to take the whole world literally to solve these issues. So we have to think about women voices, also people of color, people of lower income groups, everyone, in order to actually find climate solutions that work, because the circular economy won't succeed unless it's an inclusive economy. And so those are the kinds of stories I look to tell, and through the podcast and other outlets.
And that's really unique in that all the different various methods in which you bring these conversations, this discourse, and really allowing those who wouldn't get an opportunity to engage in these conversations directly to perhaps even be a fly on the wall. You've had conversations with world leaders and strategists and advocates, anyone who's a stakeholder, really. How do you think about telling the narrative? How do you decide what is the story and how to design the story for the audience that you are then communicating it to?
Well, I generally view the role of media to point out successes, but also point out failures, to bring those diverse voices I just mentioned into the conversation. We often don't even do a good enough job of that, even if we're aware of it. So we really have to be intentional about it. And that is the role of the media writ large, is to raise up voices of people that aren't often heard from. And that also includes pointing out perspectives that may not be super comfortable. In our podcast, we have a bipartisan podcast, and we do not support climate denialism or anything like that, but we're trying to show that there are a range of opinions on what the solutions should be in that nitty-gritty, more niche area of climate policymaking. So that's something that I try to do in picking stories, is find who are the people in power or not, and how can we bring their voices into the conversation? Because again, it will take everyone to make this work. And if it's a small group of people, it'll only potentially remain in that community alone. So that's what I view the role of media as doing and what we try to do with our podcast. And I actually just had a piece that ran in Huffington Post today on the solar industry's workforce diversity problem. It is doing a lot. It's trying to do better. But we need to point out that there's still a lot more work to be done. And even now, amid the coronavirus recovery, it's important to keep pushing on diversity in the workforce and in customers they serve so that this industry can be successful in the long run.
Yes, and that's awesome. You do a fantastic job of reporting those stories and to really sharing it through various mediums. One that you just mentioned, your Political Climate podcast, that I will make a shameless plug for. It's fabulous because you really do have that bipartisan approach and all the various perspectives while still staying true to the facts. And that's the point. It's evidence and it's science first. So what are your plans going forward as you think about developing out your communication efforts and strategy? And in particular, the Political Climate podcast, how do you hope to continue to not just you as yourself, but also as a member of the larger media to share the stories and to really bring light to the stories of those who might not have had an opportunity to get it out there otherwise?
Yeah, well, shameless plug for your session for coming on our podcast and talking about the human behavioral elements of climate change and the response to coronavirus and the links there. Going forward, we're excited just later this month to have former Secretary of State John Kerry on to talk big, broad perspectives on how we move forward on climate change in these very difficult times. And just this week, we have a piece running in our Path to Zero series in partnership with the think tank Third Way about the African American community and climate and how they're engaging on those issues, what's important to them, and also in the context of coronavirus, as so much is right now, given that this community has been disproportionately affected by the illness itself. And so we look at that also through a climate lens. So a couple of good episodes coming up that I hope everyone will check out on everywhere they get podcasts. You can find Political Climate there.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. We really can't do this alone. We are talking about connecting not just from the top-down level, but from the bottom up, and the role of the media and how telling these stories and really encompassing the big picture, as well as to those on the ground every day that are working day in and day out to make the case that this is something that we are collectively in together. Our future is truly what we choose. And so throwback to Christiana's book. Thank you to Julia and the Political Climate podcast. And with that, I will send it back to Stockholm. Thank you very much here from Washington, D.C. on day 2, the circular economy.
Well, thank you so much, Jutta. That was a fantastic lineup of experts, all of them women. Very inspiring indeed. So now we're going to move on to the next section, and let's take a little break before that with a We Don't Have Time bumper. The next section, we have 2 more doers and thinkers with inspiring keynotes. And let's start off with Carina Borgström Hansson, a very experienced senior person from WWF.
Here is Carina Borgström Hansson, Senior Advisor for WWF. Her work focuses on mobilizing cities' climate action plans for holding global warming beneath the critical 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold and increasing cities' competence in consumption-based emissions.
Hi there, Carina. Great to see you.
Katarina.
Great to see you. We're very excited to have you with us on the program. So please continue with your presentation.
Great. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. So, in these uncertain times, it's extra important, of course, to begin with remembering the things we know. So, for example, we know our breaching of planetary boundaries has rapidly grown the risk of global ecosystem breakdown. We know that the threats against the planet's climate and biospheric integrity are already extremely severe. And to sum it up in rough footprint terms, we know it's not sustainable to live as if we had 1.75 planets, when in reality we only have one. We also know what we need to do, as highlighted in the exponential roadmap. To prevent runaway climate change, we must cut global GHG emissions at least by half each decade onwards. And fossil fuels must stay in the ground, and emissions must shrink exponentially, while solutions must grow exponentially as well if we are to build the future we really want. Now, good news is that there is no lack of solutions. The Exponential Roadmap has presented sector-based trajectories, including 36 globally scalable solutions that would enable our first halving of emissions by 2030. The only thing missing is the political courage or the will among governments and businesses to speed up the required changes in the global system of production and consumption and really implement these solutions at scale. Let's talk a little about the basics of this production and consumption system. I think we're all aware that there can be no sustained production of things and services if nobody consumes them. And when talking about responsibilities for halving emissions, we need to look at these emissions both from a production and a consumption perspective. Emission accounting and comparison between nations usually take a production perspective on emissions. And this means the focus is on the production processes within the country, and therefore only emissions that are generated within the country are included. In contrast, a consumption perspective will look at, sorry, I just want to double check, am I showing my slides? Can we double check that my slides are being shown? Okay.
Karina, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You have not shared your slides, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I couldn't intervene before now. So if you
Okay,
can,
I'm
please
so
try
sorry.
to share the slides.
Yeah.
Great.
I think I'm sharing them now.
We can see them now, but just try to move on so they're at where you're at now.
Absolutely. I won't start from the beginning then. I'm really sorry.
We would have liked, but it's not possible due to the time. Thank you.
I will share
Continue.
them afterwards. Yeah. So what I wanted
please
to
put
say,
it on full screen. Full screen, please.
Okay, full screen. There we go.
It's not the right view. It's good now. It's good now. Great.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Okay. So when we talk about the responsibilities for halving emissions, we need to look at them both from a production and consumption perspective. And what I try to explain is that there's a difference between if you look at where the emissions happen, where things are produced, and then what it is that generate those emissions. And that's the difference between production-based and consumption-based emissions. Now, if we want to compare consumption-based and production-based emissions on a global level, we find that there's no difference, because on the global level, you can't consume more than what you produce. But when we compare consumption-based and production-based emissions for countries, we see a very interesting pattern with consumption in some countries apparently driving emissions in other countries. So this map that I hope you all see shows the difference between consumption and production emissions normalized by per capita. And in some countries, typically in wealthy countries, consumption-based emissions are much higher than emissions from production. In a country like Sweden, for example, our emission accounts double when we count emissions from consumption. In other countries, emissions from production are much higher than the consumption-based emissions, because the things produced in these countries are mainly consumed elsewhere. So China is a well-known example here. And there's a reason why China has been called the factory of the world. But note the dark blue and the light blue, not dark blue color. That indicates that domestic consumption in China has begun to grow. And that is something consumption tends to do when income per capita grows. So rising income is key. And rising income and urbanization often go together. Accordingly, cities tend to have higher emissions from consumption than from production. And the megacity network C40 cities, they found in analysis of their nearly 100 member cities, that while the average production-based emissions per citizen was 2.9 tons, the average consumption-based emissions per citizen was 4.5 tons. And the study also reveals that if no action is taken to counteract the trend, the average consumption-based emissions from C40 citizens will almost double by 2050. Now, much as our consumption-based emissions tend to grow with growing income, our overall ecological footprint also correlates with income. As a whole, as you know, humanity lives as if we had 1 3/4 of the planet. But as you see in this slide, the appropriation of the planet's production capacity is not equal. For example, if everyone lived like in the US, we need 5 planets to provide all the resources and absorb the carbon dioxide emissions. Now, what is it in our lifestyles that determine the size of our carbon footprint? Here, I list the major components, not in an order of magnitude, but in an order to remind us all that we need to think about how we live if we are to halve the global emissions by 2030. Transport emissions are higher for people who own and use cars for getting around. And flying is also a rapidly growing share of the carbon footprint of the global middle class. And you may know that with business as usual, aviation could represent 1/4 of the global carbon emissions by 2050. But using mass transit and cycling, electromobility, remote working and meetings, that can radically reduce the consumption-based emissions from transport. Now, emissions from housing increase when we build big and badly insulated dwellings that depend on fossil fuels for heating and cooling and electricity, while compact buildings in low carbon construction materials with high energy efficiency and default use and production of renewable energy will radically reduce those emissions. Then we come to investment. We consume financial services, and everyone with a bank account is more or less indirectly supporting fossil fuel exploration and extraction via the bank or pension fund and its lending and investment policies. So all carbon must stay in the ground. And this is why 100% divestment from fossil fuel is a crucial step, not only to reduce emissions from investment, but to make the future we want at all possible. Nutrition. The major culprit here is the growing share of animal products in our diets. And 1/3 of the food that is produced is also wasted on its way from farm to fork. Shifting towards healthy plant-based diets and cutting food waste, those are essential measures to reduce those emissions, and at the same time a win-win-win, as it would simultaneously improve human health and reduce the pressure on this planet's biodiversity and scarce land and fresh water. Finally, consumption of stuff. There's a limit to how much you can eat, but the growth in stuff we buy and throw away seems unstoppable unless we decide to shift to a more sufficiency-oriented and circular economy that could greatly reduce emissions and demand for raw materials, and could also create new jobs in the recirculation and repair of materials and products. So, to halve emissions by 2030, we need to change both how we produce and consume, and we all have a role to play in speeding this up. Businesses will, of course, need to halve their own emissions directly as well as indirectly by influencing their value chains, but they also need to revisit their business model and design and scale products and services that cut emissions, both on the production and consumption side. And to survive, they will need to do all they can to engage both employees and consumers to become part of the solution instead of the problem. And we citizens do also have an important role. We're all consumers, and it's time to walk the talk, isn't it? For example, we need to choose bike over car, train over plane. We need to eat more plant-based and stop wasting food. And we need to tell our bank we want our savings to be invested in the future, not in fossil fuels. But we can't change the whole production and consumption system as consumers alone. And that's why we need to be active citizens and support ambitious and well-informed decisions by our governments, both on the national and local level. governments are key actors in that they set the stage for the whole consumption and production game, where businesses, workers, and consumers interact. With rapidly growing ecological risk and vulnerabilities, we need clear targets, visions, and decisions, such as keeping carbon in the ground and rapidly scaling exponential roadmap solutions. Good news is that many local governments have already set out targets to transform their cities into places that enable both sustainable and attractive lifestyles, realizing the multiple benefits of job creation, better public health, resilience from investing in energy efficiency and renewable energy-based buildings, recycling, walkability, bikeability, and sustainable food production and consumption systems. Cities are important arenas for the transformation to the future we want. But leadership from national governments remains critical and urgent in these uncertain times. So before closing, let me go back to the corona crisis and how it has exposed both how biologically vulnerable we are and the importance of social justice and collaboration both within and between nations. And as any crisis, it has also reminded us what matters most to us and makes our life worth living. So it's important that our national governments integrate these experiences and lead a process of building back a more resilient and sustainable system of production and consumption. The Sustainable Development Goals provide important milestones here. And equally important is to remember the basic fact that our production and consumption system, or in other words, our economy, depends on the health and the integrity, both of our societies and the biosphere, which is the ultimate basis for our survival. Therefore, to enable us to build back better, our governments must deliver a new deal for people and nature, a deal that allows us all to thrive together. Thank you for listening and being part of this. Over.
Well, thank you very much, Carina Borgström Hansson. Let's see what questions we have gotten from the viewers on the app, Nick Nuttall from Earth Day.
Yes, we have some questions now because basically the service has been resumed after it appears as if Google pulled the plug on our broadcast sometime this afternoon, which was a bit of a shock. Anyway, people are back online again. Yeah, well, there's one question here from one viewer about the whole postponement of not only COP26, but the postponement of the biodiversity conference that was happening in China. What concerns do you have about the postponement of these two landmark meetings, conferences, which were supposed to push the agenda forward on both wildlife, biodiversity, species extinction, and climate change?
Well, I'm mostly concerned because we haven't stopped the destruction, and we are losing time. That's the issue. But at the same time, we are in another crisis, so we need to be very creative and use this pause and this opportunity, maybe also to reflect. And again, understand our biological vulnerability and really understand and listen to what the system is telling us so that we can enhance ambition as soon as it's possible to proceed and meet again. And of course, this conference is a perfect example of how we can actually continue working and allow a lot of people to participate in a debate and a discussion online. So let's use the time wisely. That's our hope, that everybody uses this collective experience to enhance ambition and try to catch up with the time lost.
Thank you very much, Carina. You stay on with us for the panel. We have a panel coming up. And we now continue with a segment with experts that would present their solutions, and then we have a discussion afterwards. Let's start with the first video.
Margustero leads the Finnish innovation fund Sitra Sustainable Everyday Life program, which creates solutions for societies to reduce climate emissions by changing people's everyday habits. These solutions allow every citizen to find their own way of living a sustainable, below 1.5 degree lifestyle. The solutions are also digital, open source, free and scalable to any country. More than 1 million Finns have taken Sitra's lifestyle test for tailored suggestions to improve their lives and lower their carbon emissions. As a result, 41% of Finns have changed the way they eat, live, move about and make purchases.
Hello there, 41%. That's pretty impressive. How do you plan to scale this even more?
Okay, pretty simple. All of the tools that we have created are open source and we give them for free to anyone who wants to do the same type of program in their own country. At the moment, we have 6 different pilots that are starting around the world where local teams are engaging their brothers and sisters in tackling climate change from everyday habits point of view.
So if you're watching this from another country, how do you access? Who do you contact if they want to use your ideas?
Google Sitra and my name and we'll go from there.
I hope you'll be swamped.
Yes, I hope I will be. There's a team that will help me, so we are ready to get every country in the world going on this. And then we can actually produce a tremendous amount of CO2 reduction globally.
Well, thank you for your work. And stay on for the panel talk. We'll now move on to the next presentation, the next video.
Christian Möller-Holst is CEO and founder of Goodwings, with a vision to turn the hotel industry into a driving force for positive change within the framework of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Goodwings' business model is built on partnerships with diverse NGOs that work to create a more sustainable future. Instead of relying on traditional marketing, Goodwings' message is spread by those NGOs. The money saved on marketing is then given to the NGOs to fund their projects. Christian has found this unique business model has the potential to unlock $50 billion for climate change work every year.
So hello there, Christian. What you work with is very much related to the travel industry. How has your work been affected by the COVID virus?
I mean, we've been scaling for the last 6 months. We really hit the product market fit in 19, and we thought that March was going to be our breakthrough, and from there on start see the exponential growth. And at the moment, we have 0 turnover. So we need to take desperate measures to keep positive.
Well, you still look composed, so best of luck. And scaling after all this is, I mean, how can you change the way you work? Because there's no business as usual, going back to business as usual, of course, after this.
No, I mean, of course, everyone is wondering when is travel going to pick up, when are travel bans going to be lifted, and how are we going to travel? Are there going to be more governmental, intergovernmental restrictions on tracking where have you been, which countries have you passed through, and etc. I think everyone appreciates that travel will pick up at some point, and post-corona and being in a time of economic crisis, I think everyone is aware that the fact that the sustainable transformation of the travel industry is going to be hit hard. So I believe that we are actually going to be quite well positioned post-corona, given the fact that we take the money from Google and other online platforms and put it into the money of the nonprofits who are on the ground and actually ensuring that we deliver on the 17 global goals. And that's going to be of great importance post-corona.
Well, thank you. And stay on for the panel talk. Let's move to the next video, next presentation of Kilian Kaminski.
This is Kilian Kaminski, founder and CEO of Refurbed, an online marketplace for refurbished electronics. 50 million tons of e-waste are discarded annually, and the production of new electronics is a massive factor contributing to pollution of the atmosphere. Refurbed is out to change that. They have created a sustainable and affordable product category between new and used through rigorous quality controls, minimum 1-year warranty and 30-day test phase, as well as planting a tree for every sold product. Since Kilian founded Refurbed in 2017, the company has sold more than 150,000 refurbished electronics products and has successfully expanded from Austria into Germany, Italy, and Poland.
Hi there, Kilian. Great work you're doing. Please, just in a few sentences, explain the difference between used and refurbed in terms of what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So I think the big problem is that the term used is always recognized on a really negative base for the most of the society. So we created an own category, which means that these products are completely tested in up to 40 steps from professional merchants, which check every single unit and of course reduce the footprint massively, because the product has been produced already and only these parts which do not work anymore are exchanged. So therefore we have a clearly less electronic waste, we have less CO2 emissions, which makes the product cheaper and more environmental friendly. And in addition to it, you also get a warranty, which of course is extremely important nowadays regarding security.
Absolutely. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's bring back Carina to the panel and also the previous two speakers. Let's see if we can get them here on the screen. Wonderful. So Carina, after you've listened to Marco, Kilian and Christian, what are your reflections on what they're doing?
Well, I find this extremely inspiring. And well, I have a lot of questions. Am I allowed to pose questions as well?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Because I like to learn more, really. So maybe beginning with Marcus, because I really like this type of initiatives, and I'm so amazed about the take-up in Finnish society. And my question to you, based on your experience so far, would you say that the Finns will be able to halve their consumption-based emissions very soon as a people? And what additional measures, maybe by others than consumers, will be needed to speed this up? Considering that for equity reasons, while the world needs halving by 2030, like richer countries like your country and my country in Sweden will need to halve much quicker. So I'd love to hear your reflections there.
Excellent question. I'm happy to say and announce that this is totally doable in much faster fashion than 10 years to halve your emissions. So the first indications from people who've made a plan how they want to cut their personal carbon footprint show us numbers that the first year reduction plans and plans that have been completed have reduced 30% of an individual's carbon footprint. So if you can do first year 30% reduction, second year 30% reduction, you've already reduced 51% of your total carbon footprint. So this is totally doable, much faster than 10 years. The only thing we need to make sure of is that we spread this to a wider community than those who are currently looking at their individual choices from an ecological point of view. So how do we make this exciting, appealing to people who are maybe prioritizing other things than carbon or environmental matters?
Marcus,
and that's something that we are trying to tackle.
Marcus, may I add a question to that? Are you also targeting public institutions with this tool?
We are not. We are targeting directly individuals and citizens and what type of decisions they make Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and so forth. So how do we make sure that things that you can do and are in control of can, in a meaningful manner, contribute to fighting climate?
But you could, in an extended version, also be able to tweak what the public institutions are doing.
Definitely. So we can show the data so that options that people readily choose, what are those, and then options or behavior changes that people are not making. We can ask from citizens that what type of help do you need? Do you need new, easier products that will help you to pick up on the new behavior, or do you need maybe government support or some kind of stick or carrot so that you can more easily and readily change your behavior?
Great. More questions, Carina? Go ahead.
So it was very interesting also listening to Christian, and again we have the COVID crisis, and I also think in terms of we know there is a huge emissions abatement potential with remote working and meetings. So I'm sure you already thought about it, but would your network of hotels be interested in offering rooms and coordinated tech solutions for remote working and meetings as an alternative to long distance traveling? because I know there are so many people now struggling with home office that is not a really viable option, and with less long distance travel, maybe this is one way of adapting a business model of some of the hotels to develop some kind of alternative offer. So I'm just curious to know your thoughts about this.
Well, really good question. I think the hotels that I have talked to, and remember that being an online travel platform, you don't partner directly with individual hotels. You basically, what you do is you partner with the big databases that can give you large volumes of inventory, because we have 1 million hotels on the platform. But the hotels that I have talked to, however, are looking into these opportunities. I know hotels in Copenhagen are doing it already. But I mean, to be honest, it's not economically sustainable for them to go down that road. It's a way of mitigating the crisis that they're in at the moment. I think what they're really waiting for is to get some tourists into the hotels. Also, some hotels in our part of the world have been used for as hospitals, and I mean, I think they want to turn the hotels back from hospitals and back to hotels. I think that's really what they're looking for.
Thank you. Kaina, did you have a question to Kilian too?
Well, if I can go on, what I was thinking about there is, I just love this initiative, and it's such an important step for electronics. It's such a key issue. And we urgently need to close the loops of material here, and we can reduce emissions. And you're doing just a fantastic job. And I would love initiatives like yours to take a much bigger share of the market. So my question is, of course, based on your experience, what would be required for initiatives like yours to grow to a scale where you really enable a closing of the material loops from the electronics industry?
Thank you for that question. Kilian.
Yes. So I think, of course, it's extremely expensive to increase awareness. So for us, it's a lot about establishing this new condition category of refurbished product and refurbed instead of only used and new. So for us, it's all about marketing expenditures. So what we currently do, for example, in Germany and Austria, we have TV advertisement to just explaining them. There is an option to buy sustainable electronic products by buying them refurbished instead of new. So that is an important part what we as a company can do. But of course, from the policymakers, from the government, there's a lot of potential, like as an example, doing tax cuts on refurbished products. In Sweden, you have it already with repairs, reduced taxes. And of course, you could also do this on refurbished products, so to promote them even more, to increase the companies which are doing the refurbishment, but on the same time to make it more attractive for customers to buy perfect working products in a sustainable way, and of course, saving money. As Markus already mentioned as well, it's important to not only tackle this part of the society which already is environmental aware, but to tackle the majority of the society, which of course in a lot of people, the price is an important factor. And so refurbished products benefit in the sustainability and in the price, which makes it really rare.
Kilian, you talk about policy changes. Many of the public institutions, they have procurement rules. Could we weigh factors like yours with refurbed products, electronic products into procurement, and how could that be done?
Yeah, I mean, we, for example, we try to work this out with the Austrian government, as it's the closest to us, as we are based in Austria. For example, a great way would be that all of these procurements, they have to also ask for refurbished option for products, because right now they always choose new products and never even ask for the option of having a sustainable option. And I mean, the government should be the one which literally goes the first step and shows the rest of the society that they take it serious. Because normally also what we see on the European level with the Green Deal, everyone mentioned to promote refurbishment or promote circular economy, but on the same time they still buy, for example, new products instead of buying refurbished products. And there we're talking about hundreds of thousands of notebooks, for example, hundreds of thousands of phones. So they could literally make a huge difference if they would start the whole process.
Well, we really, all of us, well, not all of us, because most of us working with the environment have recycled our electronics, but many people do have a mine in their drawer at home with all sorts of rare minerals, right? To be aware of. So, Killian and Marcus, and when you've looked at each other's products here, and also, of course, Christian, your solutions, how could you learn from each other? How could you share your common experiences in leveling up, scaling what you're doing? Any reflections from the three of you?
I mean, I see a lot of similarities between what Killian explained he's doing, which is really about explaining a new category. I think when it comes to travel, and especially online travel, no one really understands the value chain. I mean, as also from what I understood the question just earlier, do you talk to the hotels? Because of course, when you go to Goodwings and you see we have 1 million hotels, you expect us to be in a partnership with the hotels, but really we are not. We're partnering with one of many parts in this value chain, and that's really, we're trying to cut out the middlemen and create value. So I think Killian and I could probably share a lot of experiences about redefining the industry and creating value in new ways, and how you come about that in your communication and marketing efforts.
Thank you. Any more comments on the sharing of knowledge point?
Yeah, I mean, for example, I'm adding completely to Christian that it's important to also communicate within the industry, and even if it's different like niches, like for example traveling, as well as for us it's electronic products, it's still the same course which we are trying to tackle the climate crisis and to do our part to make it to a better future, and also to give our children probably a world which is as nice as we can see today. But also, I think it's important from the policy side and the politics that they ask the experts, as we are, for their feedback, and to include them in the process of establishing new laws, new enforcements, and so on. Because we probably know the industry in this regard better than they do when they are based in Brussels. So I think this would be also a great help to ask more the experts of the specific industries. To bring the whole industry forward and to hold the whole sustainability.
Thank you. Carina, WWF is a major player in developing solutions and tools. Now you're using the exponential roadmap. How can you as an organization reach even further into the minds of the consumers now when we really have to shift rapidly into a circular economy?
Yes, absolutely. We need to, every citizen needs to be reached. And I'd like to talk about us both as consumers and citizens, because we won't achieve the change alone or just by acting as consumers. We would like, and our model is to work in collaboration and try to convene different actors. As has been mentioned here, it's so important that, for example, the rule makers, the guys in governments that sets the stage for what's going to happen on the production and consumption stage, they need to be informed about people's concerns, and they need to understand what the businesses actually can do. That's one of the values of the exponential roadmap. It demonstrates that we already have these 36 solutions ready to scale up. For the first halving, we don't even need any additional innovation. For the next halvings, we do. So this kind of brokering of between different actors in society is a role that we are taking on, and we can't do this alone. So that's why collaboration with many different actors is key. So together it's possible.
Well, thank you. And now you have 3 more friends to collaborate with. Well, thank you all of you in the panel. Thank you, Carina Borgström Hansson, for your work.
Thank you.
We're now moving in to the next segment. We're digging deeper into few more minds of doers and thinkers.
This is Isabella Palmgren. In 2017, she founded Mimbly, which innovates sustainable laundry products, and has created the Mimbox, an add-on water recycling system for laundry machines that recycles water, saves energy, and captures microplastic.
Hi there, Isabella. Great to have you with us. You have our attention.
Great to be here.
Yeah, just explain a little bit more about what you're doing, please.
Yes, I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see what we're doing. So, can you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Yes, perfect. So as said, my name is Isabella Palmgren. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Mimbly. and we create sustainable laundry solutions. Because the truth is that 25% of the water in an average household goes towards laundry. All of this warm water is then released into the sewer filled with microplastics. These are tiny plastic particles that are released from your clothes when you do laundry. So from fleece, polyester, anything that's made out of plastic. And one wash can release 9 million of these tiny, tiny fibers. They go straight through the water treatment plants and end up in our oceans. And out of the microplastics in the oceans, 35% actually comes from laundry. They get eaten by plankton and fish, and then in the end by you and me. And we eat about 1 credit card worth of microfibers every single week. While at the same time, 5 billion people are experiencing water stress every year. And these are the 2 problems that we tackle at Mimbly: water shortage and microplastic pollution. We started our company by thinking about the question if we really need drinkable water to clean our clothes. And the answer is no, we need clean enough water to clean our clothes. So we developed a technology that we call the Mimbox. This is an add-on water recycling system for laundry machines. It attaches to any type of brand or size of machine, and we currently attached it to 2 machines at the same time to maximize the savings. So our customers are hotels, laundromats, apartment complexes with shared laundry rooms, and customers that do a lot of laundry. And we can show them in real time how much water and energy they're saving, but also how much money they're saving. This is what the Mimbox looks like today. So we save up to 70% of the water. This depends on what you wash and how dirty your laundry is. And we filter away the microplastics that are released from the clothes. And we save energy. We can save the energy by keeping the heat of the water inside of the system. Then we don't need to heat up the water as much for the next wash. So we can reuse both the water and the energy. So the Mimbox is attached to the laundry machines in between the wall and the machines. And all the water from the machines goes through the Mimbox. Here we filter all the water, regardless if we're going to reuse it or not. And then we analyze the water to determine the water quality. If the water quality falls outside of our parameters, we throw it into the sewer. But we still filter it for microplastics. And then if it's good enough to be recycled, we can store it inside of our system. Here we also have an antimicrobial system so that we can store the water for the next day or for the next wash or whenever you're going to wash again. And then when you're doing your next wash, you can take water that's either recycled or tap water if there's no water inside of the Mimbox anymore. And then we have these microfibers. So we have developed our own filter that we have that empties itself in a separate compartment. And this is what you see here, the microplastic compartment. And these microfibers you throw away in the trash. So we avoid getting them into the water mainstream again and traveling up the food chain. We have an amazing team today. We're based in Gothenburg, Sweden, and we come from Chalmers University of Technology. We closed an investment round now in the beginning of this year and are currently growing the team and growing the business as well. We are doing a big pilot now after the summer and have signed on 20 of the biggest real estate owners in the Nordics that are going to be a part of that. And we are launching the system next year, which is going to be great. But our purpose and our mission is to have as much impact as possible. And to be able to have this impact, we need to have a lot of systems out on the market. And when we have 30,000 systems out together with our customers, we will save 1,800 tons of microfibers from being released into the oceans. We will save 45 million cubic meters of water, 114 gigawatt hours of energy, which also corresponds to a lot of money for our customers. And we compensate for 47,000 tons of CO2. And this is what we want to do in the big picture. Because the truth is that we have a growing population, our consumption continues to increase, and our water consumption continues to increase. But gray water also continues to increase. So this is a resource that we really should take advantage of because it contains both energy and water, which saves you a lot of money, saves the environment. That's good for everyone. So if you're interested, please visit our website, contact us, and I hope to hear from you soon.
Well, thank you very much, Isabella. Impressive numbers you're cranking there. Really, really impressive. So you're focused very much on user-centered products and also the economic incentives. Why is that?
Yes, because most of the customers won't make a bad investment. They could do a ±0 investment for sustainability reasons, but you still need to have a return of investment on the products. We believe to be able to sell many products and to be able to have a big impact and reach everyone.
Well, best of luck scaling your fabulous work. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next guest is actually in the studio, but we will start with an introduction and then move over to a video.
Hans, who leads sustainability and corporate responsibility at Ragn-Sells, a European leader in waste management, environmental services and recycling. He's also deeply involved in creating environmental targets for Sweden's sea and coastal regions and creating Sweden's industry roadmap for net zero emissions by 2045.
And now we're going to see a video of the work that this person is initiating.
Normally, bin lorries start their journey empty, pick up waste and return to the depot full. And delivery lorries with all those parcels we love start their journey full, drop off the parcels and return to the depot empty. But all these journeys are clogging up our cities. So what if we combine the two jobs? That's what's happening in Stockholm, Sweden.
Normalt så är det här två separata flöden, avfall och gods. Det vi gör i älskade stadsamarbetet är att slå ihop de här två flödena till ett, som gör att vi kan hantera både gods och avfall.
People fixing the world.
At the depot, Simon's loading his trunk with the day's deliveries. Then he takes them to homes and businesses around the city centre. But instead of coming back empty, he picks up the recycling.
So we go full in and full out with parcels and waste.
It's part of a plan to cut emissions and make the city nicer to live in.
We have more and more people and freight that need to move around on our streets. And at the same time, we want to use our streets in another way, focus more on people and pedestrians.
So a parcel company pays a waste company to do the final leg of the delivery.
Ni har sett ett samarbete som går över gränser med olika företag som normalt inte jobbar med varandra. Det har varit ekonomiskt lönsamt från dag ett utan några tillskott stödpengar från andra håll.
As a result, 3 bin lorries and 3 delivery lorries have been decommissioned and replaced by electric vehicles. The waste company says this has cut its CO2 emissions by 74%. But to really solve the problem, should we all order fewer parcels?
I think people in general need to be more aware of the negative impact on their local environment when they buy something online. So maybe perhaps people should stop buying 3 sweaters and send 2 of them back and being more aware of the transport that's actually generated.
Welcome to the studio, Pelle och Hans. Great to have you here. Profitable from day one, no subsidies. This could be scalable. How could you scale this to other sectors, cities, other regions, even other countries? We have lots of people watching.
We have already opened up this also in Norway, 2 cities, and another city in Sweden, Malmö. And so the interest is high from a lot of cities now. And we started this collaboration in 2017. So it's really going good. And I think that's the reason why we are profitable. It's for real. It doesn't need subsidies.
And it's sort of a very strange collaboration when you look at it, waste and new goods. What sort of resistance has that evoked when you started trying to put these sectors together?
This is a question of trust, and Bring, as the parcel deliverer, they really trust, especially with Erik, the man of the movie. He was the one that really they met in the first place, and so by creating trust between the company or between the companies, we said don't compete, let's collaborate instead. And I think collaboration will be a key enabler and must for creating circularity going forward. And this is one example where we said, don't do this as ask for having the lowest cost. Let's do something together that create value for both companies.
You're also working with some other circular systems in Ragn-Sells, getting waste nutrients back into the system. Can you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yes, in 1881, the family company was founded, and this was one
1881.
1881. So this we are now in third generation.
We're very circular.
And this was he was supposed to emigrate to U.S. in 1881, so he borrowed money for a horse and started to transport goods and people in and out of Stockholm. The thing was that it was a bad buy because the horse died after just a couple of months. So he couldn't emigrate to US. But the next year, in 1882, he borrowed more money, bought a second horse, and then the company bloomed, and he didn't need to go to US. So then after another 15 years, we became the biggest transport company in Stockholm with horses. At that time, he also took packages or products into the city of Stockholm and brought out litter,
So this was done already a long time ago.
Exactly, and that was the starting point where we also brought nutrients back to the land. Tomorrow, or in the future, we will bring back nutrients, but then we would use chemical engineering instead. So we will do it in large scale, and now we're going to target the global arena. But we'll come back on Thursday and talk more about that.
Well, we need to know a little bit more.
All right. What we talk about, we have innovations how to recycle phosphorus, potassium, and also nitrogen, and do it in a chemical way. So it means that we don't need to bypass the atmosphere and create emissions. So it's really all of the processes are carbon sinks. But I started with this one man, 1881, that had an idea of creating value. And now we are 6.4 billion Swedish crowns in interest in 4 countries, but we have now started to open up in another 2 countries also.
Well, wonderful work. It'll be exciting to follow this idea with the nutrients. Thanks for coming to the studio, Per Larssons from Ragn-Sells, and best of luck.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you. We're now moving on to another solution, another great example.
This is Vari McClement. She helped launch the Good On You app, which rates clothing brands on their environmental, human, and animal rights impacts. She is also a former journalist and a climate activist in Australia.
Well, let's now listen to a pre-recorded video with Vari.
Hi, my name is Vari McClement. I'm from Good On You. Good On You is our world-leading source of trusted brand ratings on fashion. And what we do is look at fashion's impact on people, animals, and the environment. So we know that fashion has a huge impact on the climate. We don't exactly know how much of an impact it is, but it's been estimated at around 10% of emissions come from the fashion industry. And fashion also touches on a lot of industries. That's, agriculture, transport, as well as the supply chains in fashion itself. So it really is a massive global industry with a huge impact on the climate. So what do we do at Good On You? Well, we rate fashion brands for the impact in 3 areas: people, planet, and animals. When it comes to the planet, we look at carbon emissions, and we look at what people are doing in their supply chains to reduce carbon emissions, because the supply chain is one of the biggest sources of emissions for fashion brands. And we also look at things like sourcing renewable energy, and whether or not a brand has set targets to reduce their emissions. This is the Good On You app. You can look up a brand and find out what it's saying about how it's tackling the environmental issues around fashion, whether it's set targets to reduce its emissions or not. And you can compare brands with other brands to see which ones are doing best. And we have a rating system which scores brands out of 5 for each of the areas that we look at, and then gives an overall score as well. So that's for consumers when they're looking to buy from brands that do the right thing by the environment. For brands themselves, it can be very difficult to actually measure emissions. And if you're not measuring emissions, then you can't really set targets to reduce them. So we produced this. This is the Climate Change Toolkit for fashion brands. It's a 6-step guide on how to reduce your emissions, how to measure them first, and what parameters to set and how to get started with that. And it breaks it down through scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. and really gives a kind of walkthrough guide for fashion brands to reduce their emissions. So what can we do as people, as ordinary consumers, people who wear clothes ourselves to reduce our fashion impact? Well, the biggest thing that we can all do is to make our clothes last longer. Study after study shows that we are buying more clothes, wearing them for less amount of time than we used to maybe 20 years ago. This is generating a huge amount of waste and using a huge amount of resources to produce these clothes. So just making your clothes last longer and therefore buying fewer clothes is one of the biggest things that we can do. When you do need to buy new clothes, you can always pick up the app and have a look at what the brand says it's doing about the planet, so you can be sure when you're buying clothes that you're buying from brands that really are addressing these issues. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Vari, for your important work. And this is really a sector where there's much room for improvement indeed. We're now moving on to another fantastic guest. Let's see the introduction.
Meet Ursula de Castro, a designer and internationally recognized opinion leader in sustainable fashion. In 2013, Ursula founded the global sustainable fashion campaign Fashion Revolution, which now has a participation from over 70 countries.
Thank you for joining us, Ursula. We're all ears.
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know Fashion Revolution, we believe in an industry that conserves and restores the environment and that values people over profit. We were born as a result of the Rana Plaza disaster in 2013. Some of you may recognize our first hashtag, Who Made My Clothes, which has been used over 1 million times on Instagram since inception. We started really talking about transparency and public disclosures from brands, but always with a mission to incrementally dig deeper into the complicated topics that the fashion supply chain presents us. And so in 2017, we started looking at mass consumption, mass production, and the accelerated burden of accelerated disposal. We launched another hashtag called Loved Clothes Last, and really started to communicate with our audience around longevity of clothing. And as the previous speaker from Good On You was saying, making clothes last longer. However, it is just as important that we citizens learn ways to prolong the life of our clothing, learning about our responsibility in the second half of the value chain of clothing. But it's just as important to ensure that we scrutinize brands when it comes to their waste management practices throughout their fashion supply chain, when it comes to their pre-consumer waste, and when it comes to the unsold garments that they store. And what we've been doing since we launched the Fashion Transparency Index, our 6th edition is launching today. You can find it on the Fashion Revolution website, is to ensure that we also look at how much brands disclose around their waste management practices and what they're actually doing to halt this problem, which is huge. We believe that it is imperative that we move towards a circular economy, but at the same time, a circular economy in itself and circularity in itself, it's not enough unless it is coupled with the usage of innovative materials and ensuring that the people who make our clothes are allowed to organize and unionize, and unless we enter a culture, a future where we look at quality before we look at quantity. And what I mean by quality is not just quality of product, but it's also the quality of the lives of the people that are making this product. We believe that we need to disinvest in growth in order to invest in supply chain prosperity and abundance, and that really the future is an industry that is more efficient, more connected, and radically transparent. We know for a fact when it comes to circularity, in particular chemical circularity and recycling, that we are nowhere near where we need to be. There is massive investment, and there are some brilliant organizations that are beginning to really explore what this will be. But the reality is that, according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we are only really recycling 1% fiber to fiber. And considering that this is an industry that produces approximately 150 billion garments per year, we know that this is not enough. We know that we cannot wait that long, that serious measures need to be taken now in order to redress the balance between consumption and disposal. This industry is as inefficient as it is wasteful. And if anything, what we are learning during this COVID crisis is the huge inventory problem that we will face once we are out of here. And hopefully, although I'm not necessarily optimistic that we will move towards a more mindful consumption immediately, I do believe that there is the potential to turn all of this waste, all of these unwanted products into new jobs, new descriptions. I believe that we will need to marry technology with creativity and with common sense, and to really start from the very beginning, and that is education, to ensure that the generations of tomorrow, the young designers of tomorrow, have a very different attitude towards consuming and disposing, creating the systems that we will need so that citizens can really become a part of the solution. As I mentioned before, the minute we take ownership of a piece of clothing, we are responsible for the rest of its life. I don't necessarily believe that we need to impose or demand strict adhering for individuals to be learning how to mend and learning how to fix. I think it's important if it's voluntary, but it's just as important that we ensure that it is our councils, our cities that provide mending facilities for those of us who can't, maybe with 4 children, come home at night and start darning a pair of jeans. So this is very much what Fashion Revolution does, trying to put together all the dots and ensuring that we have contents and suggestions for our audience, but also for the policymakers, the academics, and the governments and the organizations who can really, really make a difference. This is a strange Fashion Revolution week for us. We always come together during the anniversary of the Rana Plaza and campaign with our global hubs. And obviously things are very different this year. We're online and it's, there is a very different vibe. But what we are hoping to achieve, at least for those who can, is to take the time and interrogate our own wardrobes. What are you made of? What can I do to make you last a long time? What are the components that this piece of clothing is made of? That's also incredibly important to know. It's a knowledge that will determine how people buy. The more we know that blended fabrics cannot be recycled, the more we will question whether we should buy something which is disposable and made of blended fibers. The more we know that polyester, for instance, releases microfibers when we wash it, the more we might be careful in the way that we treat it once we own it. So we see a whole connection in between everybody working together to make this a fairer fashion industry. And I guess what is important for me is that I don't really believe that this is an opportunity. I believe that this is an obligation. If there is one thing that we are learning from COVID is that nature is rejoicing. Cities are less polluted and we can hear, birds singing and fishes are back into rivers. All of this while we're simultaneously witnessing the suffering of so many people, all the vulnerables in our communities losing jobs and losing opportunities. So I hope that we will emerge collectively out of this with a heightened sense of empathy for our closest and nearest, for the people who make our clothes, and respect for the natural resources of the earth and the environment that we all share. I'm going to read the Fashion Revolution's Point 6 manifesto. You can find the full manifesto on our website. But number 6, which is dedicated to Earth Day, is fashion conserves and restores the environment. It does not deplete precious resources, degrade our soil, pollute our air and water, nor harm our health. Fashion protects the welfare of all living things and safeguards our diverse ecosystem. When it comes to our clothing, considering where they end up with, it's just as important as knowing where they come from. I'm going to leave you with 2 quotes that were very influential in my professional and personal life. The first one is from Laurent Antoine de Lavoisier. He is the father of modern chemistry. And he said, "In nature, nothing is created and nothing is destroyed, but everything is transformed." And the second one is from Joan Crawford. And it said, "Care for your clothes like the good friends they are." Thank you for inviting me to speak, and I hope you will keep on following Fashion Revolution Week for the next few days.
Well, thank you so much, Ursula de Castro. Fantastic work you've been doing for now more than 7 years with the Fashion Revolution. Thank you so much for joining in. I have a question to you. Do you think it's enough that the consumers, that we do this transformation, or do we need support from decision makers, politicians in terms of taxes, other regulations?
Absolutely. I mean, this is really not something that consumers and citizens can do on their own. There is not one sector of society that is responsible for change. It's all sectors of societies working together. So it has to be the governments that legislates, the brands that become radically transparent so that we can create a culture of vigilance and scrutiny, because this is what consumers need. If you don't know what the issue is, you can't campaign, you can't inform yourself, and ultimately you cannot make informed decisions. So this is why we need to all cooperate together in order to come out of this situation and find better solutions.
Thank you. With me here on the stage, I have Nick Nuttall. What questions do we have from the viewers?
Yes, Ursula, hi, lovely to see you. So there's one question here from Johannes, and I suppose it's a pretty straightforward question, but not so easy maybe to answer. Which large fashion company or brand do you think has come longest and furthest on the path towards sustainable fashion? And thanks very much for your speech.
Thank you. Well, you know what? I don't really believe that there is anyone that's doing any better than anybody else at the very top layer. I mean, you can see our Fashion Transparency Index. We will only comment on what brands publicly disclose, but we can't really know at the end of the day of, fully their practices, because the industry is so disconnected. Fashion Revolution has a unique attitude in the sense that we don't name and shame brands, but we don't necessarily thank them either. So my answer for you here is we need to look towards the smaller businesses. We need to look towards the emerging designers. We need to look towards those nimble houses and organizations and people who can embed ethics and sustainability and innovation from the very start. This is something that I hope to see in the very near future. I hope to see a slowing down of those brands that are producing billions, that are somehow taking too much space in our high streets, in order to give room to multiple creative and different solutions. Somebody inspired me by telling me that in nature, nature doesn't upscale very well, but it replicates. So in a future where we are more in tune with nature, that's what I would like to see. More replication of smaller, successful brands. If I could make a little bit of advertising, we launched our initiative, Fashion Open Studio, www.fashionopenstudio.com. And you can see so many of these brands from India to South America to Europe to, all over the world, really coming up with incredible solutions. Those are the ones that have gone the furthest for me.
Well, thank you so much, Ursula de Castro, for being with us and sharing your insights. Wonderful work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are now moving on to look at two young women and their journey.
Meet Moa Berglund, a student of recycling design and upcycling. Moa has a strong engagement in environmental movements. She talks about slow fashion practices, slow travel, and upcycling to inspire people to be a part of a positive transition. This is Agata Pucciato. She cycled from Alaska to Panama, connecting with people and learning about culture and nature, an adventure that ultimately led her to her current studies in recycle design.
And now let's look at the video from these two wonderful women. Hi.
Hello.
You're here.
Yes.
Yes. I thought you were supposed to see a video, but we're going to talk to you first. That's great. Yes. So tell us a little bit more about your journey. What brought you onto this?
Well, yeah. So my name is Moa, and my name is Agata. So we study recycle design in Sweden. At Retuna, it's the world's first upcycling mall that is open in Sweden. And we had an idea of learning as much as possible during our internship. So we decided to research, but we couldn't find one spot. There were so many interesting places to learn about. So yeah, we decided to do a little, interrail trip.
Yes, and we call that trip Reunite the Future. And what we did during the trip was visiting inspiring communities and companies that promotes a sustainable approach, learning from their work and spreading what they are doing to create more positivity and hope in the world. So we've been back in Sweden for 1 month now, and now we will show you 2 of the places that we went to, and we hope to inspire you.
Go ahead. Let's look at your video.
One of our first stops on the trip was the Danish island Bornholm. We read that the whole island was going to go zero waste 2032. They want to show the way of a future without waste. That caught our interest, and we contacted Bufa, that's a waste management on the island.
So we met up with David, who showed us around the island and explained how they plan to accomplish this goal. Their vision of a zero waste island is ambitious and said. It is very inspiring, as we have not heard of any other region who have put a brave and necessary goal like this.
And what is inspiring is that they might not have an answer for everything, but the goal is far more important than that. They are all the time looking for solutions, since they're going to close down the incineration part.
By engaging the citizens through workshops at the existing hub for circularity called Möbelfabriken, they want to create awareness and find new innovations as a community on the island. We left the island and took the trains further south and ended up in Portugal, where we went to the community Aldeia do Vale.
This fantastic community is inspiration for future societies. We met up with Sylvia, who is one of the founders of Aldeia do Vale. The Village in the Valley is a project that is working on teaching and spreading permaculture, mimicking nature and teaching how it works.
Simply creating soil that is fertile and gives a healthy environment for vegetables and people to be around. To fight the toxic in the ground that is made by human power. We need to learn from Aldeia do Vale to make permaculture to something ordinary in our everyday lives.
We often want to change the world with big projects, and one of the things that we've learned during these days at the farm is the importance of starting with your own community, as well as giving back to nature, a true sustainable community.
Aldeia do Vale are taking a percentage of the money earned from the courses to spend on local projects for more sustainability. They have been planting at schools and elderly homes. The power of giving back to people in the community, not only through sustainability, but to engage and get people to connect.
Great job, Moa and Agata. Wonderful to see your video. So what is the most important thing that you have learned during these journeys?
I think it is that because we were really spontaneous during the trip, and we let the people that we met like help us, and we asked a lot of people like, okay, what do you think about, or what inspires you, and do you have any recommendation or where we can go in this city? And that made the journey so beautiful.
And what we also learned, that there's so many places and so many companies and communities that are actually doing good for the environment, for the world, that are inspiring. There's more out there than we think there is. And I think, like as often media portrays like a picture, you think, oh, nothing's happening in my town, but there is actually, I think, more to it than you think.
What can we as individuals do better? I mean, what have you been inspired from an individual perspective in these 2 journeys that you've done?
I think do small things and start with your own community. I don't think it has to be rather big things. I think start with talking to your neighbor, or like the little things that we can do around us. I think that's what inspired.
And also to learn from each other and hear about projects that has been or has happened before, so you can learn from their story and their work and maybe do the same thing if it's a good thing.
Well, thank you, Moa and Agata, for sharing your optimism. It's been very, very inspiring to listen to you, and keep up your wonderful work. Thank you. Well, it's time to conclude. It's a fantastic second day, isn't it, Ingmar? But we had some glitches. What happened? Tell us.
Actually, YouTube shut us down in the middle of Christiana Figueres' speech.
Oh dear.
Our content about the climate crisis is too dangerous and harmful, and violating the YouTube rules. We don't know exactly what it was, but something was it. And I think this is very strange that you have this company that tells people what they are allowed to watch and what not. It's censorship, actually. And what is more strange is that if you go to YouTube, you will find millions of conspiracy theories, flat Earth society, and a lot of stuff. So I think this is exactly why we need a new social media where you can speak truth to power about the climate and what's needed and done. And we're going to show you that in our short film.
Do you want to act on the climate crisis but don't know how? With our app, you can send climate reviews to organizations and leaders. Our team reaches out to the organization to encourage dialogue. Just download We Don't Have Time. Tap the green Create button and choose type of review. Give climate love to people doing great stuff. Create a climate idea to suggest a solution. Or send a climate warning to those who hurt the planet. To increase your impact, you can share the review, because when enough people agree with you, organizations and leaders will change. Many even want your opinion, because we have to work together. Do you want to be part of the solution?
Nick, what has been your key takeaways from today? You've been taking a lot of questions. There's big interest in this topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole concept of the circular economy, which, as we were saying at the beginning of the show, goes back many, many, many years, and there have been other terms too, like ecological society and all kinds of things. There's still obviously a long way to go, and that's absolutely clear. I mean, listening to Ursula, for example, talking about fashion and what connects us more than our clothes and our food, these are two areas that it's still pitifully low in terms of what actually is going on. I think the other thing I learned, if I don't mind just saying, is this whole business of it's absurd, wouldn't it, that Google would disconnect a program on climate change. I mean, you know, the fact is the whole world has agreed that, in fact, we need to act on climate change. And yet, you know, some people still think it's a political issue. This has to be beyond politics. You know, the science is absolutely clear. This is about survival, and you can't play with this. You can debate whether it's going to be renewable energy or whether it's going to be, you know, saving your forests. What is the mechanism you need to deal with climate change? But not the issue itself. This is absolutely absurd.
It's pitiful.
Yeah.
Johan Falk, what has been your main takeaways from today?
I think we've seen a lot of examples of fantastic innovation, you know, in clothing, in materials, and so on. And we have a lot of focus on shifting the energy transition to renewable energy, and we need to give circular economy just the same focus. It's just as important. And to cut emissions, we talk about cutting emissions by 50% in 10 years, also from materials and from the industry. We think that is achievable, that the solutions are there, but we need to get much stronger focus and start scaling these innovations. And our society is so wasteful, so we think there is an opportunity. In a lot of industries, we waste possibly more than 90%. So it's better both from an economical viewpoint and for the climate.
Absolutely.
The opportunity is there. We've seen that.
How could we scale and push? I mean, the circular economy even quicker into society. What do we need? What do we need, Nick and Johan?
I think we need a political framework which is much stronger in all countries and from a European level, actually moving away from the waste economy to the circular economy. That's absolutely critical. That should be part of the new Green Deal, for example, in Europe. Secondly, we need businesses, a critical mass of businesses actually stepping up and shifting their business models to become circular instead of wasteful. But also we need to contribute as citizens and consumers to actually drive the demand of these products, as we saw examples. From Marcus, for example, I mean, we as consumers in the rich world can pretty easily cut our emissions by 50% in less than 2 years by just shifting consumption, conscious choice.
That's very hopeful.
Yes.
Well, much has been very hopeful today. And let's thank the viewers, and let's thank all the experts and the panelists and all the wonderful people that have been on the show. Tomorrow we are back with another program. We'll focus tomorrow on big ideas and education. And please stay with us now for a reused song. We are playing a video and music, a song, and it's a special thanks to the arranger, Nasreen Alamin from Surge, Africa, for this Nigerian cover of the We Don't Have Time song. Thank you for today. Bye-bye.
A distant sound, closer, soon it's all around. Hear me, time is running out. Come on, tell them what it's all about. We're running out of time, we're running out of air. We gotta keep it clean, show me that you care. Wherever you are, you got to wake up. United as a nation. There's a world to say, right or wrong, how will you behave? Do the right thing, as they used to say, more than ever, that is true today. Be part of the solution, switch it up, for future generations, level up. If our planet dies, how will you console me? We don't have time to ignore the signs. more time.